Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Assembly Committee on Judiciary. I'm going to call this meeting to order. Madam Secretary, would you please call the roll?
Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod.
Here.
Assemblywoman Cohen.
Here.
Assemblywoman Gonzalez. Assemblywoman Hanson.
Here, sorry.
Assemblywoman Hardy.
Here.
Assemblywoman Kasama. Assemblywoman Krasner. Assemblywoman Marzola.
Here.
Assemblyman Miller.
Here.
Assemblywoman Wynn.
Here.
Assemblyman O'Neill.
Here.
Assemblyman Orentlicker.
Here.
Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong.
Here.
Assemblyman Wheeler.
Here.
Chairman Yeager.
I am here. Can you please mark Assemblywoman Kasama absent excused? I see we have Assemblywoman Krasner here now, so please mark her as present. That means we do have a quorum. Good morning, everyone on the committee, and good morning to those who may be joining us on the Zoom, as well as those who may be watching on the internet or on the legislature's YouTube page. Welcome to the Assembly Committee on Judiciary and day 47 of the 81st session of the Nevada Legislature. Before we get started on this morning's agenda, just a few quick housekeeping rules. If you're joining us on the Zoom today, could you please remember to mute unless you are speaking? That will help with the audio feedback. For our presenters or anybody who may be answering questions on the Zoom today, if you could remember to state your name each time before you speak, that'll help our committee secretary prepare the minutes. It's not a natural thing to do, so I'll remind you if you forget. I'm sure that somebody will forget at some point today, so no pressure with that. We do expect courtesy and respect in our interactions with one another. We don't always agree on policy. That's perfectly okay, but we need to make sure we're being respectful of one another, the legislative institution, and most importantly, our staff that is helping us make these meetings happen. Finally, many members will be using multiple devices to access the meeting, including laptops, desktops, extra monitors, iPhones, iPads. This is the virtual world we're in for the moment, so please don't see it as a sign of disrespect if members appear to be looking away during the meeting. They're most likely accessing exhibits or notes or reading bills. So with that behind us, we'll move on to our agenda. Committee, as you can see, we have two bills on the agenda today. We are going to take those two bills in order. So at this time, I'm going to open the hearing on Assembly Bill 237. Assembly Bill 237 revises various provisions relating to real property. We have Assemblywoman Housekeeping joining us today to present the bill, and she does have a few presenters with her to go over the bill. So we'll give them a chance to make their presentation. Then I'm sure we'll have some questions. So welcome back to the Assembly Judiciary Committee for the second time this week, Assemblywoman Housekeeping, and please proceed.
Thank you, Chair Yeager and members of the committee. It's so nice to be with you guys again this morning. For the record, I'm Assemblywoman Sandra Housekeeping, proudly representing Assembly District 41, and I'm here with you today to present Assembly Bill 237 for your consideration. The genesis of Assembly Bill 237 was a result of Assembly Bill 335 from the 2019 session, which made it out of both houses with unanimous support. AB 335 was introduced in partnership with the Community Association Management Executive Officers and the Nevada Association of Realtors, something we worked on together for almost 18 months. Assembly Bill 335 accomplished two things. One, it streamlines the residential selling process for the organizations who do the behind-the-scenes paperwork. And two, it established uniform fee caps for HOA resale packages, HOA demands, and HOA transfer fees. We are here today to clean up language regarding the HOA portion of Assembly Bill 335. AB 237 will add in language to clarify that association management companies can't charge resale closing fees other than those in statute. Once AB 335 was signed into law, we saw junk fees begin to emerge. Also left out of Assembly Bill 335 is the CPI increase of no more than 3% to the transfer fee, which we all agreed we would add to the resale, demand, and transfer. During drafting, we added it to the demand and resale and accidentally left it off the transfer cost. New to this bill is an enforcement mechanism. AB 287 will also give the CIC Commission the ability to impose a fine of not more than $250 for the associations who are in violation of the fee structure. The reason we added this is due to the fact that some associations continue to charge more than they are statutorily authorized to. I have, on 2 or personal occasions, signed buyers where their association was charging $100 and $150 more than what they were allowed to on the transfer cost of the HOA. This will give the CIC the authority to enforce the laws that we passed in this body in 2019. Chair and members, I am here today with the association and realtors who don't normally come to the table together, but the association management companies and realtors are here to show that this was a bill that we all worked on in good effort together for many years and want to make sure it's fully implemented to its intent. I would now like to turn it over to Joel Just with the Community Association Management Executive Officers, and then Dave Tina on behalf of the Nevada Association of Realtors. Mr. Just, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and the members of the committee. For the record, I'm Joel Just. I'm the current president of Cameo, which is comprised of HOA management company executives. I want to thank Assemblywoman Housekeeping and the realtors for all their help in addressing the industry concerns as laid out for you in the Assemblywoman's amendment. We are strongly in support of the amendment, which in our opinion will continue on the Assemblywoman's hard work of rooting out the bad actors of association management world and allow professional organizations like Cameo, whose members play by the rule, to continue to make their HOAs the best they can be for every homeowner. We are grateful for the ongoing partnership, not only with the Assemblywoman, but with the realtors who sit around the table, now socially distanced, year in and year out, and we work collaboratively on finding solutions for mutual problems within the industry. Thank the members of Cameo fully support the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Just. And committee members, before we move on, I neglected to mention, I think you all received it already, but there is a proposed amendment on Nellis from Assemblywoman Housekeeping that I believe really deals with just section 1 of the bill in that part. And there's a second part of the bill that we'll get to. So if you haven't had a chance to see that, for members of the committee, members of the public, that is up on Nellis under the exhibit tab. So thank you, Mr. Just. And I think Assemblywoman Housekeeping, you said we're going to go to Mr. Tina next, right?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Dave Tina, and I am serving as the legislative chair for the Nevada Realtors. On behalf of more than 18,000 members of our realtors, we are pleased to have the opportunity to testify in support of AB 237 and the intent behind it. First, let me thank Assemblywoman Housekeeping for bringing this important legislation forward. It is an important consumer protection bill. And let me acknowledge our working partnership with Cameo in working through this issue with us. We have seen and support the proposed amendment being brought forward by the Assemblywoman. It reflects the discussions we have had over the interim with all the parties involved. I would like to take the rest of this time to discuss why additional fees charged for HOA resale packages are problematic from a consumer point of view. We have especially seen the practice of excessive fees being charged by to consumers by smaller management associations. In that we can't get demand statements, they ask us for fees that are in turn not with the regulation. Therefore, making it harder to close a transaction in a time where we don't have a large amount of homes. So the last thing we want is to have these problems to stop us from closing. So thank you for what you are doing. We appreciate the hard work of Assemblywoman Housekeeping has done, as well as our partners in Cameo, in working with us to address this important consumer issue. Tiffany Banks is here on behalf of the realtors to answer any technical questions you may have on the language. I am here to answer any questions you may have from the practitioner point of view. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Tina. Assemblywoman Howdige, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Just and Mr. Tina. Now, Chair, I would like to turn it over to Mr. Michael Buckley on behalf of the Real Property section of the Bar to walk the committee through the remainder of the bill. The Real Property section of the Bar needed a vehicle for cleanup language to their section of the NRS, and I was happy to provide AB 237 to accomplish this. Mr. Buckley?
Thank you, Assemblywoman. And my name is Michael Buckley, and Chair and members of the Judiciary Committee. First of all, thank you very much, Assemblywoman Howdige, for allowing us to include our proposals in your bill. The Real Property section routinely comes up with a bill in the session. What happens is we encounter provisions in statutes that we think need correction, and we've been doing this for many sessions now, and this is a continuation. And I would say also that in particular this time, the section is in the process of publishing an extensive manual on real estate law by the State Bar, and so in preparing that manual, we've come across a number of just most of these things are changes. The section doesn't have policy positions, so our job is our goal is to have laws that read and make sense, and to make corrections when possible. So with that in mind, let me say there's several technical changes which I'll just breeze through, and then a couple more that probably require some explanation. Sections 2, 4, and 5, the reference to Article 2 of Chapter 116 has another statute in it, so we just corrected that reference. Section 6, the amount that could be charged was changed in 2019, so this was a conforming change to that amount. Section 7, I think it actually was mentioned this morning when the Chapter 116 was originally enacted, it referred to something called a certificate. Over the years, Chapter 116 has been amended, and what now is delivered on a resale is called a resale package. So we just corrected the reference where there was a reference to a certificate being the whole resale package. We just changed that to the resale package rather than the certificate. Sections 8 and 9 are a little more than technical, but and require some explanation. The Chapter 107 originally referred to a trustee sale occurring in accordance with the execution sale statutes. NRS 40.430, a judicial foreclosure, still cross-references to an execution sale. But there's a difference between an execution sale and a judicial foreclosure. In an execution sale, somebody has a judgment against a person, a money judgment, and they can record that judgment and find whatever property the judgment debtor owns in the county is subject to execution sale. And so there's the right of the judgment debtor to designate which property can be sold. So what we've done in Section 8 is that in a judicial foreclosure sale, or in any foreclosure sale, there are people who are entitled to notice. For example, junior lienors and guarantors, but the execution sale statutes don't refer to that. So Section 8 is intended to make sure that whoever was entitled to notice in a mortgage foreclosure gets notice. And that was missing from the execution sale statutes. So we added a reference to a foreclosure sale. In Section 9, as I mentioned, In a case of a mortgage or deed of trust, the debtor has already agreed which property is to be sold if the borrower defaults. So there's no reason for the judgment debtor to designate which property is to be sold. In fact, in Chapter 107 and 106, it really falls to the lender to say, if there's more of the property that's going to be sold, it's up to the lender, the beneficiary or the mortgagee to make that determination. Section 10 and 11 deal with judicial partitions. So if more than one person owns property and they can't agree what to do with the property, there's a procedure in NRS for partition of the property. Either the court will divide the property or sell the property. And the statute, which I don't think has been amended since 1911, refers to an abstract of title. And abstracts of title are not used anymore. What is used is a guarantee. It would be a litigation guarantee. So what we did in Section 10 and 11 was to update the statute to refer to a litigation guarantee rather than an abstract of title. Section 12, there is an exception for what we call the one action rule if you are proceeding under the Uniform Commercial Code. This is very technical. The Uniform Commercial Code is chapters 104 and 104A of NRS, so we just added the reference to 104A. Sections 13 and 14 were little background on that. With the problem with mortgage fraud in the recession, these statutes, both of these statutes were amended to require an assignment of a mortgage or deed of trust or a subordination of a mortgage or deed of trust to be recorded. Before that, it just said they may be recorded. And our purpose here is really to make the statutes understandable. As presently written, it refers to a mortgage or deed of trust, a mortgage of personal property or crops before 1935. In 1965, the Uniform Commercial Code was adopted and said that everything, any lien on personal property is governed by the UCC. So our intent here is to remove this antiquated reference to a personal property mortgage. Section 15, this again is very technical. There's a reference to a plural of a trustee in a deed of trust, and it's really only should be singular. And finally, Section 16, we had legislation clarifying in 2019 that a person could waive the benefit of protection for a landlord of real property. There's two dates in this statute when the notice has to be given to people affected by the waiver, and we just clarify it. That's whichever is the later of the two dates, since there are two dates. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you all so much for your presentation of Assembly Bill 237. I do have some questions. I'm going to go first to Assemblywoman Cohen.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for the presentation. My question is about in Section 9, the sales under foreclosure and when there are multiple properties. So I just want to confirm, let's say you have a creditor that has 5 properties and 4 of them are worth the value of the 5th one, and all that together, selling either the group of 4 or the 1 would cover the debt. And the creditor doesn't have the debtor doesn't have the right to say, sell these 4, I want to keep the 5th one, or vice versa. Anything like that. They just have no say in how that gets done.
Thank you. So Michael Buckley's responding, Assemblywoman. So the example I guess you're saying is where, remember we're talking about a deed of trust or a mortgage where the borrower encumbered these properties to secure the debt. In the there's actually a conflict in the statute because for example, the execution sale statute says that the debtor can designate which parcel is to be sold. The mortgage statute, and mortgages have to be judicially foreclosed. The mortgage statute in the statutory covenants actually specifies that it's the lender that decides which property is to be foreclosed. So we're trying to make a consistency between the statute which covers a mortgage or deed of trust and the statute that covers just a general execution sale. I guess so. I mean, in answer to your question, if you have a mortgage and there are multiple properties covered by that same mortgage or deed of trust, the debtor doesn't have that ability to, under the mortgage or deed of trust statutes, to say which property is sold. That was decided at the beginning of when the loan was made. When the loan goes into default, it's the lender that controls the foreclosure process rather than the borrower. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bills like this, I'll say in the 2017 session, a former Assemblyman, Elliot Anderson, loved to jump into these bills. And last session, former Assemblywoman Shea Bacchus always had a lot of questions about these bills. And I don't know if they're watching, and they probably are, and we're certainly missing their expertise. But Mr. Buckley, I'm going to take a couple of questions on Section 9 and try to see if I understand what we're doing. Obviously, the terms used in real estate can be very technical, but let me ask a couple of questions. Let me know if I'm on the right track here. So Section 9, we're essentially dealing with two different types of sales of property. And I believe the one you indicated, the first one was the execution sale. And so the way I understand that is if somebody owes money to somebody, so that person would be the debtor, if they owe money to somebody, and as a result of that, property is going to be sold to satisfy the amount of money that they owe, the person who owes the money essentially gets to choose which property is going to be sold to satisfy that debt. So it's not the person who is owed the money, but the person who owes the money who makes the decision if it's an execution sale. Do I have that right?
Mr. Chairman, Michael Buckley, yes, that's correct. As I said, if you owe somebody money and then you go to court, and the judgment, the creditor goes to court and gets a judgment, that judgment can be recorded and it's a lien on all the property that person owns. And that's an execution sale to enforce that judgment. And that's the time when the judgment debtor can say, oh, sell this one, not that one.
Great, thank you. And then I think in contrast to that, we talk about the judicial sales, which really are related to mortgages. So I don't know how many homeowners we have on the committee or watching in the public, but I think most of us, if we are homeowners, didn't pay cash for the home. We had to take out a mortgage and get a loan to buy the home. And so I think what you're saying is when you agreed to that and you sign those documents, there's a provision in there that says if you default on the mortgage, then that property that you're defaulting on is the one that is going to be sold. But obviously that goes through a different type of process. It's a judicial foreclosure, but that would be the reason where the person who holds the property couldn't say, well, I want to hold on to this property where I've defaulted, but I want to sell some other piece of property to satisfy it. So do I, generally speaking, have that right?
Mr. Chairman, Michael Buckley again. Yes, you do. I would say also, just to clarify, that most foreclosures are non-judicial, so there's not even a court action. A judicial foreclosure is very rare because in a judicial foreclosure, after the sale, the borrower and any junior creditor has a year after the sale to redeem the property. So most lenders would go for a non-judicial sale where there's no redemption period.
Thank you for that clarification, Mr. Buckley. Of course, that's normally how it works. And I guess the only other question I would have on the execution sale side of this equation, someone goes to court or they have a judgment, they record it as a lien. Are courts involved in that process of selling property to satisfy that debt, or what role, if any, does a court play in that process?
Mr. Chairman, Michael Buckley again. My knowledge on this is because I edited the chapter on attachment and judgment and execution sales in our practice manual. But what happens is the sheriff, the civil office of the sheriff's division handles those sales. The courts are not involved. once the judgment's issued, it's covered by the Sheriff's Department.
Thank you, Mr. Buckley, and we're looking forward to the publication of the reference manual you referenced. So if folks here are on Judiciary next session, you're probably going to get a copy of that so you can dive into some real estate law, because as Mr. Buckley stated, we usually do have a bill or two in this topic area during the session, and I believe there might be one coming from the Senate if it makes it over as well. So I'm going to stop asking questions for the moment, and I'll open it up for other committee members. Does anybody else have questions on either part of Assembly Bill 237, either the first part dealing with HOA, resale package fees, or the second part dealing with real property and real estate? Going to give folks a chance to raise their hands. I'm not seeing any questions at the moment, so I want to thank the presenters for being here to present, and I'll ask you to sit tight for just a moment. We're going to take testimony on the bill, and then we'll come back for concluding remarks. So at this point, I'm going to open it up for testimony in support of Assembly Bill 237. Is there anybody on the Zoom who wanted to give supportive testimony? Ms. Banks, I know you're here. I wasn't sure if you're here just for questions or if you wanted to provide testimony in support.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just here if questions are asked.
Great, thank you so much. Is there anybody else on the Zoom who would like to give testimony in support? If so, if you could turn your camera on, unmute yourself, and just let me know you'd like to offer supportive testimony. Okay, we have a lot of folks on the Zoom. I think many of them are here for the next bill we're going to hear. So VPS, let's go to the phone lines at this point to see if there's anybody there who'd like to give testimony in support of Assembly Bill 237.
To testify in support of AB 237, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Again, to testify in support of AB 237, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 765. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin. Caller with the, go on.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the Judiciary Committee. My name is Garrett Gordon, spelled Garrett. Last name Gordon, Gordon. I'm a partner at the law firm of Lewis and Roca, and today representing the Community Association Institute and its 1,300 members who speak for over 3,000 community associations across the state. We want to put on the record our support with the amendment of the proposed bill. I want to thank the sponsor for bringing the amendment and the bill. And again, thank you for everyone's time today. Bye.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Gordon. It's good to have you back in Judiciary this session. I'm sure we'll be seeing you with future homeowners association bills as well. BPS, is there anybody else who'd like to testify in support of Assembly Bill 237?
We are currently taking testimony for support for AB 237. Please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no more callers in support of AB 237 at this time.
Thank you, BPS. I'm going to close testimony in support. I will now open it up for testimony in opposition. I don't believe we have anybody on the Zoom in opposition, but if I'm incorrect, if you could simply turn your camera on, unmute, and let me know you'd like to testify in opposition, please. I don't see that happening. BPS, could we go back to the phone lines and see if there's anybody there who'd like to offer testimony in opposition?
Thank you. To testify in opposition of AB 237, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Again, to testify in opposition of AB 237, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers in opposition at this time.
Thank you, BPS. I'll close testimony in opposition. I will open it up for testimony in neutral. Again, I don't believe we have any guests on the Zoom who want to testify in neutral. If I'm incorrect, simply turn on your mic and let me know. I don't see that happening. BPS, could we go back to the phone lines one last time to see if there's neutral testimony on Assembly Bill 237?
To testify in neutral of AB 237, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 187. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin. Caller with the last 3 digits, 187. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You may begin.
Good morning. My name is Chavez Foger, spelled C-H-A-R-V as in Victor, E-Z. Last name Foger, F-O-G-E-R. I'm the ombudsman representing the Nevada Real Estate Division. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Foger. BPS, anybody else in the neutral position?
Chair, there are no more callers in the neutral position at this time.
Thank you so much, BPS. I will close neutral testimony. At this time, I will hand it back to Assemblywoman Howdigi to make any concluding remarks she would like to make on Assembly Bill 237.
Thank you, Chair and committee members. I just want to thank you for the opportunity to bring Assembly Bill 237, and I urge your support.
Thank you, Assemblywoman, and thank you for joining us this morning, and thank you to Mr. Just, Mr. Tina, Ms. Banks, and Mr. Buckley for also spending a few minutes with us on your Friday morning. We greatly appreciate it, and we hope you have a great rest of the day. So I will close the hearing on Assembly Bill 237. And if you give me a minute, I'll find my agenda and we'll figure out where we're going next. So at this time, I will open the hearing on Assembly Bill 243. Assembly Bill 243 revises provisions relating to the administration of justice. We have our own Assemblyman Orentlicker here to present the bill. And before I turn it over to him, I will let members know that there is a proposed amendment up on Nellis that I think all of you received yesterday, but for members of the public or members of the committee that want to check that out, it's under the Exhibit tab on Nellis. I believe Mr. Orentlicker has some other presenters here with him to present the provisions of the bill, so we'll give them a chance to do that, and then I'm sure there'll be a number of questions on this bill. So Assemblyman Orentlicker, welcome to the Assembly Judiciary Committee. Welcome to the virtual presentation table, and please proceed when you're ready.
Assemblyman Orentlicker, this is broadcast. Can you please unmute for us?
Sorry about that. Let me try again here. Okay, thank you. Sorry for the glitch. Thank you, Chair Yeager and members of the committee. For the record, I am David Orentlicker, representing Assembly District 20 on the east side of Las Vegas, from Paradise to Henderson. I am here today to present Assembly Bill 243, which includes 3 provisions to make our criminal justice system fair and help remedy the discriminatory impacts of law enforcement on people of color and other disfavored persons. And I want to thank several people who inspired the provisions in Assembly Bill 243, Tony Schro and Alana Bondi, Juliana Melendez and Mary Bacon, and then 5 of my colleagues at Boyd Law, Stuart Chang, Frank Rudy Cooper, Eve Hannon, Adi Rolnick, and Dimitri Shalin. So there are 3 principles that inspired these, as I say, to address the discriminatory impacts of our law enforcement system. One is kids don't think like adults, and we shouldn't punish kids like adults. 2, justice should be blind. That's a long, venerable principle in the law, as exemplified by Lady Justice. And then when legislating, we should take full advantage of the expertise of Nevadans. So I'll now go through the 3 parts of the bill with the 3 principles. First, kids don't think like adults. As we've heard during discussion of other bills, children are not mature decision makers at age 18. Their judgment is impaired, they act impulsively. And so Section 7 of this bill would ensure that when judges at sentencing consider the youth of an offender who is convicted as an adult, sometimes, as we heard from Assemblyman Miller, we transfer juveniles to adult court and prosecute and sentence them as adults. But we do already have a provision in existing law that at sentencing, the judge should take into account the fact that we have a youthful offender. Right now, the statute says up to age 18, and this Assembly Bill 243 proposes that we change that to 21, so that we take into account impaired judgment decision-making up to age 21, not 18. The second, here's Lady Justice, who well-known blindfolded. This is ancient roots, this principle of justice being blind. In the Bible, we see that you shall be partial you shall not be partial in judgment, hear out low and high alike, decide justly between the Israelite and the stranger. Justice, justice shall ye pursue. And we need to be it's such an important principle that the color of your skin, how wealthy you are, none of that should be taken into account by the decision maker. While justice should be blind, unfortunately it isn't. And so if we look at data on what happens in our law enforcement system, minorities are more likely to be stopped by the police. They're more likely to be arrested by police. They're more likely to be charged with a crime when they're arrested. They're more likely, if they're charged with a crime, to be charged with a serious crime. And if after being charged, they're more likely to be convicted of a crime and then given more serious sentence. So at every step along the way, we see racial disparities and other disparities against marginalized groups. So to try to make sure that justice truly is blind, sections 8 and 9 of this bill will make justice blind at the charging stage. Information relating to a suspect's race will be redacted from documents reviewed by prosecutors when making their initial charging decisions. They don't need to know, and they shouldn't know, the suspect's race or their name that might indicate something about their race or ethnic background. Prosecutors don't need that information, so this bill would require that documents reviewed by prosecutors, we redact that information. It's not hard to do if you work with PDF documents to redact information. So that's the second part. This would only be done, now, this is for the initial charging decision. Sometimes witness testimony, it's important to be able to know identified information. So after the initial charging decision, the prosecutors would be able to look at identifying information for purposes of witness corroboration and other things. But for the most part, that won't be necessary. The charging decision without the identifying information will be sufficient. And then the third part is to take full advantage of our state's criminal justice expertise. We're doing some very important things this session to address the inequities in our law enforcement system. We'll want to continue that effort in future sessions. And we have nationally recognized experts in criminal justice in Nevada, including faculty at the Race, Gender, and Policing program at UNLV, also at UNR and other of our institutions of higher education. So sections 3 through 5 of this bill create an advisory task force on police reform so we can draw on best practices in adopting legislative reform in future sessions. So that's the basics. I want to thank Natalie Johns also for her excellent help in preparing for this presentation. I'm joined by a few people. Juliana Melendez was going to join us because she's a youth legislator who was the inspiration for the blind charging part of this. Due to technical difficulties, she's not able to be here, but she did send me a written statement. So I'll read her written statement. Then we'll hear from Brooke Hopkins, who's done research on disparities in police and law enforcement, and then Kendra Birchie as another co-presenter. And we have some others who are available to answer questions that may come up. So Juliana Melendez, who's a Valley High School student and Nevada Youth Legislator, who, as I said, was the inspiration for the blind charging provisions of this bill. And here's what she would have said if she could have joined us. Good morning, members of the Assembly Judiciary Committee. My name is Youth Legislator Juliana Melendez, representing Senate District 10. I am here in strong support of this bill due to the fact that it is an issue close to both my heart and the hearts of Nevada youth. As the Nevada Youth Legislature is allowed to propose one BDR per session, it is one of my responsibilities to draft a BDR relating to an issue concerning youth. I chose to focus on the juvenile justice system and proposed blind charging regarding any cases against juveniles in the state of Nevada. The inspiration behind this is that I attend Valley High School in Las Vegas, made up over 92% minorities and with the most refugee students of any other high school. My peers have told me firsthand that they are over-policed in schools, and those who have encountered the juvenile justice system personnel have told me that they felt discriminated against because of the color of their skin. I had one peer from another high school say she was racially profiled by both a police officer and a detective when they accused her of committing a crime. With the rise of social movements like Black Lives Matter, this is an issue that can no longer go ignored. I've done my research, and blind charging has already been successfully implemented in San Francisco, so it is a very realistic proposal. Please strongly consider supporting this bill, as it affects the leaders of tomorrow just as much as the leaders of today. Thank you for your time. So thank you, Juliana. I'm sorry you couldn't join us today, but I'm grateful for your bringing this idea to my attention. I'd now like to have Brooke Hopkins speak about some of the research she's done on racial disparities.
Well, thank you so much, and good morning. My name is Brooke Hopkins, and I'm here today to discuss a large research project that I led as executive director of the criminal justice program at Harvard Law School. And the reason this was a study of Massachusetts, but the reason that it is relevant today is that we've determined that initial charging decisions were a key driver of racial disparities in incarceration sentences in our state. And so that is very relevant to the race blind charging provision in AB 243. Our findings are consistent with the research of others who studied different states and also the federal system and have found racial disparities in charging systems, in charging decisions throughout the country. And so this research all points to the need to address racial disparities at that charging stage, which is what AB 243 seeks to do. So let me tell you a little bit about our study. We analyzed all criminal cases for a 3-year period in Massachusetts. This was motivated by the knowledge that in our prisons, people of color are vastly overrepresented, which is true across the country as well. We found that initial charging decisions were a key driver of racial disparities in incarceration sentence length. So we found that on average, Black defendants receive incarceration sentences that were nearly 169 days longer than white defendants. When we controlled for the initial charging severity level, that disparity dropped down to just under 43 days. When we looked at Latinx defendants, they were incarcerated, their sentences were for 148 days longer than white defendants. But when we controlled for initial charge severity, again, that dropped down to 26 days. Now, what this means, what this regression analysis tells us is that the initial charging decisions were playing a huge role in creating those disparities at the sentence length stage. So this finding in itself is not necessarily surprising because Massachusetts has a sentencing scheme which is similar to every other sentencing scheme that I'm aware of, where the more severe your charge is, the longer your sentence is. And there are, of course, other factors, but that is the key factor. So it makes sense that there is a correlation between the severity of your charge and the length of your sentence. However, we were controlling for initial charge, right? And sentences are based on your final conviction offense, right? Your sentence based on what you were actually convicted of, not what you were charged with. When we looked at final conviction offenses, what we found is that they were of similar severity across race. So although defendants of color were charged more severely, ultimately, they were convicted of offenses that were about the same level of seriousness. And in fact, for Black defendants, their final conviction offenses were actually slightly less serious than white defendants. Nevertheless, their ultimate sentences were longer, right? So they were convicted of this about the same level of seriousness. Their sentences were longer, and much of that disparity in sentence length can be attributed to those initial charging decisions. This finding is consistent with other research that has been done in other states and in the federal system that has documented disparities in charging decisions. And this is what AB 243 seeks to tackle through race-blind charging. The hope is that if you can get some of these disparities taken care of at that initial stage, then you don't have as bad of a problem with the follow-on racial disparities in the system as a whole. And my research and other research that has been done in this area confirms that policies that address this disparities in this initial stage would be beneficial. So I thank you for your consideration of this bill and for your time today.
Thank you so much for your comments. And I believe, Assemblyman, we were going to go to Ms. Birchie next. Is that correct?
Yes, thank you.
Welcome back to the Assembly Judiciary Committee, Ms. Birchie, and please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Yeager, and good morning, members of the Assembly Judiciary. Other jurisdictions have already begun to adopt procedures to create race-blind charging systems. During the presentations by law enforcement before this body, you were provided with information that there currently are racial disparities and overrepresentation of minorities within our criminal justice system here in Nevada. This bill will create a more fair and equitable system to ensure that we reduce the discriminatory impact on law enforcement and charging decisions, to ensure that there is not a disproportionate application of law in charging documents. The time taken up front will help us to save time, motion work, jail time, and potentially post-sentencing hearings. More importantly, it will enhance the community trust in our criminal justice system. As you heard, what would occur in a race-blind charging system would be redactions, where you would redact the personal identifying factors of that individual that regarding to race. In the defense practice, we currently engage in redaction in order when we provide discovery to our clients. For example, things like social security numbers, we don't provide that out to ensure that it doesn't fall into the wrong hands. And so that's what we're just asking for in this race-blind charging system. In jurisdictions where they have paper documents, this could be done as simply as with pen and paper, Sharpie, and making photocopies. Luckily for a lot of jurisdictions in Nevada, we receive documents through PDF. And so you can do it through Adobe Acrobat. There are other charging softwares that could be utilized. However, at this time, just the simple redaction tools that are free on Adobe Acrobat could be utilized and should be utilized. I know that there might be some concern regarding the Valdez-Jimenez hearings that you all have heard. That's the bail hearings. However, there are systems that can be put in place to ensure that the charging officer is not the one conducting the Valdez-Jimenez hearings. During the special session, this body passed a resolution that racism is a public health crisis. We believe that this is a fiscally responsible way to reform the criminal justice system. So we urge your support of AB 243 to ensure that justice in blind and race isn't a factor. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Birchie. Assemblyman, I think there's still the initial part of the bill. Are you going to go over that portion now?
Yes, thank you. So we're working from the conceptual amendment that I sent out and that's posted on Nellis. So the first part, sections 2 through 5, I believe, this creates the task force to advise us through the Advisory Commission on the Administration of Justice going forward to study different aspects of our law enforcement system and make sure that we have policing done in a racially unbiased way and improve the fairness of our system. So the composition would include different experts in law enforcement and representatives of law enforcement and public defense and community members. And so that's the first part, and then to give the different areas in which they might provide study for us and recommendations. And then the second part is section 7, to raise the age from 18 to 21 for a youthful offender for purposes of sentencing. And we now currently, for offenders under 18 who are sentenced as an adult, their youth can be taken into account at the judge's discretion, and a reduction in their sentences can be allowed. And this would raise the age from 18 to 21. And then the final sections talk about the redaction of the identifying information. And as Ms. Birchie indicated, it's a very simple thing to do. It does add some upfront small costs in the prosecutor's office, but these are small costs, small price to pay for racial equity, and there will be long-term savings, because if we make our system fair and eliminate the unfair charges, that will save a lot of money in terms of court costs and prison costs and other costs that will far outweigh any upfront impositions in terms of the redaction. So thank you very much. I look forward to the committee's questions and comments.
Thank you so much, Assemblyman, and thank you to your co-presenters who were presenting with you this morning. I did want to let the committee know just a couple of things I neglected to mention. The PowerPoint presentation that Assemblyman Orentlicker presented is up on Nellis as well under the exhibit document, as is the testimony from Youth Legislator Melendez that is provided in writing. So we're sorry you couldn't be with us this morning, but we appreciate your work on this and your comments, and we do have your comments as an exhibit. So we're now going to move on to questions. I know we have a number of questions about the concepts in the bill. I'm going to start with Assemblywoman Wynn, and then we'll go to Assemblyman O'Neill.
Thank you, Chair Yeager, and thank you for your presentation on your bill here, Assemblyman Orentlicker. While I agree with some of the intent most of the intent of what you're trying to accomplish here, if I could just start with the section regarding the task force. As you know, I'm the chair of the ACAJ right now, and that is already a committee that is made up of 24, 26 individuals. And I'm looking at this like subcommittee type task force that would be appointed by the commission. And I'm just trying to figure out how this would work, how you came up with this equally long list of like individuals that would be consistent of the task force. I'm seeing this logistically as being like with the ACAJ turning into a like 50 to 60 person like commission and board. So I'm just wondering how that makeup came out, how you decided to place it within the statute regarded to the ACAJ, and if you could just kind of enlighten me on some of that. I know that's very general, but.
Thank you for your question, Vice Chair Wynn. David Orentlicker for the record. I'll give a bit of an answer, and then I'll ask Dimitri Shalin and Addie Rolnick, who are some of the authors of this idea. So in terms of the size and adding to the commission, I would think of this as we have this advisory commission, and I've been on a lot of boards that can always benefit by having kind of like subcommittees that specialize in certain things and can study an issue more intensively than the whole board can, and then the subcommittee can report back to the full board. So I would think of this task force as a specialized advisory body to the full commission that can draw on the expertise of academics and practitioners in the state, and then they can report to the commission and provide more, just kind of amplify the abilities of what the commission can do, because commission members have a lot of demands on their time, and this, I think, is an effective way to bolster their activities. As I said, we have Dimitri Shalin and Addie Rolnick who can speak to some of the specifics.
Mr. Shalin, did you want to add anything to that response?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I want to start by thanking all of you for doing this important work for the people of Nevada. When we were looking at the composition of the task force, our agenda was the skill mix, the kind of expertise that will help us to address the package of reforms we have in mind. And we proceed on the assumption that the problems we face with police operations are systemic. It's hard to pick up one area and try to fix it without addressing other areas. And by combining this various expert skills, we believe we should be able to provide a comprehensive analysis of what we have in place right now, and suggest, based on best practices in various jurisdictions, what we can do to improve the operations in our state. Thank you.
And Mr. Shalin, could you just let us know who you're with or who you represent?
My apology. I'm Professor Dmitry Shalin, D-M-I-T-R-I, Dmitry, S-H-A-L-I-N, Shalin. I'm a professor of sociology and director of the UNLV Center for Democratic Culture.
Thank you so much, Professor. I appreciate that. Ms. Rolnick, did you want to add anything to that response as well?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Addie Rolnick. I am a professor at Boyd School of Law and a member of the Race, Gender, and Policing program there. And so just to speak in answer to the question directly, this task force is conceived in part to be primarily a task force made up of academic and policy expert. So the idea is that this task force could more slowly look at various options for reform and how they might interact, comparing them to national models. It is meant to address a sort of a vacuum at the state level of a academic type think tank, for lack of a better word. So an academic focused organization in watching some of the process last summer in particular. There's a lot of interest, widespread interest in enacting reform and enacting reform quickly. So I'm a member of the National Academy of Sciences Committee on Reducing Racial Disparities right now. And I can tell you from that experience that it's reforms that are adopted quickly. Often we don't know what they'll do. We don't know how they'll interact with other reforms. And sometimes they can go in the wrong direction. So it was meant to focus on the need for kind of sustained study and comparison of potential reforms, and then to advise the other bodies that would be involved. It has a membership that encompasses a number of different actors, but it's primarily composed of academics as opposed to primarily composed of system actors, which is, I think, a better description of the advisory commission. And so we're hoping to sort of fill that advisory gap.
Thank you, Professor Rolnick. Appreciate that response. Vice Chair Wynn, do you have any follow-up?
I just have concerns. Like I can't even imagine, like, logistically how a commission of like 26 people would like come together to be able to, and under open meeting laws, to be able to even appoint these like 11, 12 members of this thing. I also have some concerns. I understand the, policy aspect, and I'm curious if there are other states that, put in statute some of these like think tanks. I also have some concerns that it's a task force that is addressing Nevada police reform, and it appears that of the entire committee makeup, there's only 2 people that are actually in law enforcement. To be a part of that, like even policy conversations. So I do have some concerns when it comes to that. Chair, I do have a question about another section. I know this bill is pretty comprehensive and has several different topics. Would you allow me some leeway to ask a question in another section of this bill?
Yes, please go ahead, Vice Chair. We do have a little bit more time this morning, so I would encourage members to ask questions.
Thank you. I appreciate that. My next question has to do with some of this mandating language. I appreciate and I agree with the blind evaluation and blind screening of some of these. I know when this topic was first approached and it was discussed with me, I believe I spoke with Ms. Bacon about it. It had been some enabling language to allow some of these jurisdictions to take advantage of some of this software that was available for no cost by several nonprofits. And now I see that it's kind of mandated in statute as proposed in this bill. I know that we had talked about this, and Ms. Birchie had talked about how a lot of things are PDF, but I've noticed that many other things are still handwritten. We have lots of like police departments that are using handwritten like documents. We are also have like all voluntary statements, to my knowledge, are done in handwriting. And so how are these law enforcement like screening agencies supposed to enact this blind screening process when you don't have everything electronically? Because I know that some of the programs that Ms. Bacon had informed me about were, they sounded great, and they worked in a completely electronic database, and you would be able to insert those things pretty seamlessly. But what do we do with, which I think is a large percentage of people still using handwritten documents? So I don't know if that's a question for the district attorneys that might be on the line in support, opposition, or neutral, they can answer, or if Assemblyman Ornlicker or Ms. Birchie, if you might have answers to those kind of questions, that would be great.
Chair Yeager, Kendra Birchie for the record, through you to Vice Chair Nguyen. I would just note that as defense attorneys also sometimes we do receive those probable cause sheets or the witness statements that are handwritten. We've had conversations with attorneys in rural jurisdictions who do receive those paper copies. And what they do when they have to do redactions is just use a Sharpie or a pen, and then we'll redact that material and make a photocopy and send that photocopy off. So there are other tools that can be utilized. And the way that we receive those documents in Washoe County, at least, is that it is that PDF. So it's still that handwritten documentation that then you could put into the Adobe Acrobat and redact that way. You can also use whiteout tape. So there's a lot of other ways in order to ensure that redactions can occur.
I just have concerns. I mean, you mentioned the rules, but as you know, and as other committees in the public might know, I obviously do this, so I do a lot of redacting, documentation. And in the urban setting, I would say 99% of all of the written statements I get are in writing, like all the voluntary statements. So just something to keep in mind.
Thank you, Vice Chair. And, we can always come back if you have some additional questions. I'll go next to Assemblyman O'Neill, who I had a conversation with this morning, and I think he has a few questions. But maybe before we do that, Assemblyman O'Neill, if you could hold up for just a second. It looks like I overlooked Assemblyman Orentlicker wanted to say something in response to the last question. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Yeager. I just wanted to see if Mary Bacon, who I think is with us, wanted to add anything to respond to Vice Chair Nguyen. And before that, on your first thing about the appointments, if there's a better appointer than the commission, certainly that's easy to fix. And also, one of the things that has been important to me since I came to UNLV is we are a state institution, and it's important that we be available as a resource to policymakers. And building bridges between our experts, policy experts, and our policymakers, I think is very important. And other states, a good model for this is in Texas. Every 2 years, because they meet as we do every other year, they commission a study at University of Houston, the health policy experts, to study an important health policy issue and to report to the legislature. So I think the more that we can build bridges, as I say, between our policy experts and our policymakers, I think that will be very important for the state. So thank you for this indulgence. And Mary, are you here?
I'm here, yes, thank you. This is Mary Bacon, and to respond to Vice Chair Nguyen's question, that technology, I think, is still something on the table for the future, but as of right now, what can be implemented is redacting, as attorneys redact a significant number of documents that they turn over anyways. So it certainly does not foreclose upon that happening in the future, and personally, I still hope that is able to come to fruition one day.
Thank you, Ms. Bacon. Appreciate you being here and working on this issue. Now let's go to Assemblyman O'Neill with some questions.
Thank you, Chair. And I heard that you said my question in plural. So I'd like to build upon a little bit of what Ms. Nguyen had to say on this task force. It basically is a member of 11 people that, I'm going to be honest, from my position, has implicit biases already. There's no mention of the district attorney's office being a member, of the courts, these are all part of the criminal justice system. And it only has one member of the legislature. Who appoints that? Is it a Democrat, Republican, non-party? I mean, I see more questions in this. And to me, building upon what Nguyen said, the size, it could be reduced. Several of these people, to me, are overlapping. So why were the courts and the DAs left out is my first question. Seems to me they're an important part of this.
Perhaps I could add a word on that subject, if I may. I'm Dmitry Shalin, Director of the UNLV Center for Democratic Culture. First of all, our proposal for the task force on police accountability is modeled on similar task forces created in other counties and states. So it is fairly common these days to have such a body examining best police practices and proposing reforms to legislators. Second, the exact composition of the task force is open to deliberation. It could be reduced indeed. And as Assemblyman Orentlicker emphasized, it's the issue of dividing labor and having best possible skill mix. I should point out that we do have various representatives of police force and people representing experts in this area. For instance, Adam Garcia, head of the Police Services Southern Command, who oversees police training in Southern Nevada, advised our group, and he, should governor decide so, would be a member of this committee. As for adding representatives from AG office, of course, we're all for it. So we are prepared to leave it to legislators and to governor's office to optimize the skill mix and to finalize specific members of this committee, pursuant of the suggestions that the vice chair just made and others as well. Thank you.
Assemblyman, did you want to add, did someone else want to add something to that? I saw you unmuted, Assemblyman.
No, I'll just thank you, Chair Yeager. As Professor Shallon said, we're definitely open to suggestions on how to improve the task force. As you see, the conceptual amendment has changes from the original bill, and this is certainly a work in progress. And I'm happy to consider other suggestions to make sure we have the best composition. And so please let me, members of the committee, Assemblyman O'Neill and others, Vice Chair Wynn and others who have ideas, please let me know, and we can include those for a work session amendment.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Assemblyman O'Neill, we'll go back to you for a follow-up or another question.
I appreciate that openness to revisions or amendments to the proposed bill, Mr. Hornlicker. The next part I'd like to ask is, I forget the young lady's name from Massachusetts. We talk about Lady Justice being blind, and what I heard and what I read in Mr. Hornlicker sent out an article from the New York Times is that they may be charged, somebody may have extensive charging versus another person, but at the end, when it comes to conviction, which is what dictates sentencing, they seem to balance out. And in the one study, is actually done by two different individuals independently, they found other issues that had nothing to do with race necessarily. It had to do with past criminal history, other open charges that resulted in longer sentencing and some of the increased initial charging documents. So I'm trying to figure out what are you trying to gain? You do a study, you have charging, but at the end of the day, Lady Justice does prevail, and the sentencing comes out the same, neutral across the racial board, is what I understood from it. Did I get that wrong? I assume.
Hi, this is Brooke Hopkins. Well, I'm not sure exactly which study you're referring to. In our study, yes. Okay, so in our study, we found that the final conviction offenses were of similar severity, but the sentences for defendants of color were much longer. So that is where, and that the disparity in sentence length can be traced back to the initial charges. So the initial charges were playing a larger role than any other factor. We did look at criminal history. That played almost no role in racial disparities. It was really the initial charging decision that was driving the significant sentence disparity at the very end of the process.
I'm still confused then. So they charge, but and racially, you're saying they charge more severely with racial people of color, but at the end, the conviction and the sentencing did not have any racial bias in it. Is that, I'm confused.
No, that's incorrect. The conviction offenses were of similar seriousness. The sentences were longer. And the way that happens, we don't know this for sure, but one very common hypothesis is that the vast majority of cases in the criminal system, convictions are obtained through plea deals. And what happens is if you charge somebody with multiple sentencing enhancements, charges that carry mandatory minimums, they are at risk for a very significant sentence at the end. And so they feel compelled to plead to what the prosecutor asks for, and the prosecutor can often get a longer sentence, get defendants to agree to a longer sentence if the initial charges carry a potentially longer sentence. So it is likely through the plea bargaining process that those initial charges are impacting the sentence length at the end.
Are you aware of any studies done by Stanford recently?
Studies about what?
on racial implicit biasing and use of the algorithm failed to demonstrate any statistical difference in racial outcomes.
I'm not familiar with that study.
And if Miss Professor Hopkins, if you could just remember to state your name before you speak, and Assemblyman O'Neill, if you have a copy of that study, feel free to submit it, but I don't know that anyone's had a chance to look at it, so I'm not sure that questions about it are going to be productive.
Actually, part of what Mr. Ornlicker produced in the New York Times article that he sent out last night, when it said that it failed to show that any implicit biases in the, what do you call it again, redacting of racial information on initial charging. So the only other thing, I'm not going to take up time. I'm beginning to think, though, if I may make a statement, that we made a mistake. The country's made a mistake. I keep hearing how 18-year-olds, 19, 20-year-olds should not be held responsible, yet we let them go to war force and we let them vote. Maybe we should start thinking about changing some of those laws and protecting us better. So I appreciate the time that you've given me, Mr. Chair. I'll try to get with Mr. Ornlicker and see what recommendations I can make to him. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblyman. And I'll just note for committee members and members of the public, there has been a reference to a New York Times article. Unfortunately, we can't put that on the website due to copyright issues. So if you're interested in finding that article, you know, I'm sure a Google search would produce it, but unfortunately, we're not allowed to put that up on the website due to those issues. Assemblyman Orentlicker, I noticed that you had unmuted and raised your hand. Did you want to respond at all in any way to Assemblyman O'Neill's question?
Yes, thank you, Chair Yeager and David Orentlicker for the record, Assembly District 20. The study that Assemblyman O'Neill is referring to was done in a jurisdiction where they weren't seeing racial disparities in charging. And so the algorithm didn't make a difference because they weren't having the problem that we're seeing generally, where we do know there, in most jurisdictions, we do have racial biases in charging. And so if you apply the blind charging in the jurisdictions where there are disparities in charging, then you will get a benefit.
Thank you, Assemblyman. I'm going to continue on with questions. So we'll go next to Assemblywoman Cohen.
Thank you, Chair. And I don't know, maybe we also have, there's also a United States Sentencing Commission study from 2017 that as its key findings says that Black male offenders continue to receive longer sentences than similarly situated white male offenders. So maybe we can also add that as an exhibit. And obviously there's other findings in there that kind of go that line. But my question is getting back to the task force, and I guess it's more of a recommendation that Assemblyman Orentlicker, that you consider also some other variables in the task force, such as some geographic variables in Nevada, including specifically including someone from the rurals, to make sure that we've got that considered, because obviously there are issues all throughout the state. So if you could just address if that was considered.
Yeah, we've tried to respond to all the suggestions. David Orentlicker for the record. And we haven't gotten to all of them, so we'll aim for work session to have a better list of commission members, and I appreciate your suggesting that, and I'll follow up with you and others to make sure we incorporate all the good ideas for the composition of the commission or task force.
Thank you. And then, Chair, with your indulgence, I'd just like to send out a a special recognition to my fellow Valley Viking, Ms. Melendez. Really appreciate the work she did. And I'm sure our other grad from Valley in the legislature, Assemblywoman Torres, would back me up on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. I'll go next to Assemblywoman Hanson for a question.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity, and good morning, everyone. I have a question regarding Section 8 on the amendment, Section 8, Sub 2C, when we talk about race to be redacted, and then the other things, name, language spoken, physical description, things like that. What about sex? Is it your hope at some point? I'm just curious to what identifiers could be implied as implicit bias. Does law enforcement, are they softer on women? Are they harder on women? So is sex part of an identifier that we would need to ferret out as well?
Assemblyman David Orentlicker for the record. That's a very good question, and I'm not sure about the answer. If Kendra or Mary would like to weigh in, that's fine, but something I'll certainly look at.
And I'm sorry, I don't know if anybody else was going to speak. And perhaps it's a little bit rhetorical on my part, just that I'm just trying to connect. Obviously, I'm sure everyone here, we want to ferret out when there is any sort of unfair practice in law enforcement, in the courts. And I'm having a hard time connecting the dots from at charging that we're saying the charging officer or person has some sort of implicit bias that's going to go down the line to the sentencing side. And so who is guilty of the bias? The charging person, the judge, and while I can appreciate what we're trying to accomplish, I think this is why we're here. How do we get from point A to point B? And I don't know that this is how we do it, by taking away some identifiers. Because I know that if I were, say I worked at a business and there was a robbery and I made a call to say and identify the suspect, I'm going to identify their sex, their color, their height, their weight, all these things to help identify that person. When I make that call and say what their race is, it's not racially motivated. It's not some angst. It's just to help identify the subject. So, and the other part of this that I'm wondering about when we talk about at the charging point, how much of the charging is reflecting the environment at the moment, the intensity of the crime or the suspected crime or the suspect and the interchange that's going on, that it's more an emotional situation than it is saying the race of the person is my bias. So anyway, I'm sorry, that's more of commentary just to add to the flavor of what you're trying to get to and to kind of offer some perspective and try to get some understanding. So thank you.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. And I think before I take the next question, I'd like to go to Ms. Bacon to perhaps address some of those concerns about the initial charging. I had a conversation with her a while back, and I think she did a pretty good job of explaining that. So Ms. Bacon, if you could maybe address that topic, I think it'd be helpful.
Thank you, Assemblyman, and through you to the Assemblywoman. First, I just wanted to make clear that nobody is, quote, guilty of implicit bias. we all have implicit biases. So for better or worse, I certainly think we're not trying to make a judgment here. I think it's just factually, unfortunately, what has happened. They've done studies on district court judges and federal judges, and the only thing they found is essentially we all have implicit biases. So I don't think anyone is guilty of anything, and certainly isn't trying to do anything intentionally. We're just trying to correct for something that is unfortunately there that results in unfair outcomes. As far as identifiers, things like hair color and eye color can certainly add to racial perceptions, only because if I'm stating that the suspect is blonde hair and blue eyes, that can give you a different idea of who that suspect may be, instead of if I said, you know, he has very dark eyes and black hair. So that's what that is trying to account for. As far as the gender question, my understanding is that at least currently this is focused on race and to correct racial implicit bias, but Assemblyman Orrin-Lineker could probably speak to that a little bit more clearly. And then was there another question?
No, and I appreciate you coming on. I think mine was more commentary than the initial question about gender, but thank you so much.
Yes, and as just one last follow-up, when you said that you know, if you were in a bank and it was robbed and you were reporting, you know, I was just in this bank and it was robbed, and the suspect is a 6'2" white gentleman, 180 pounds, that would all obviously be hugely helpful, and we need to catch that suspect. That makes sense. The difference is in the blind charging, you would still be able to identify that suspect for the police. The police would still hopefully arrest that suspect. Just the charging attorney would say the suspect, you know, alleged went into the bank, blah, 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 robbed it. 3 witnesses identified suspect 1 as the person who robbed the bank. The police later apprehended the suspect who robbed the bank and go from there. So it's not like we would lose any information in the policing process or ability to catch that suspect from your description. And obviously, if you're reporting a crime, we need all of that information to get that person immediately. The difference is just the charging attorney would just say the witnesses identified the suspect. They would not say the witnesses identified the 6'2" white, 180-pound gentleman.
Okay, we're going to continue on with questions. I'm going to go next to Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong and then to Assemblyman Wheeler. Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong, please go ahead.
Good morning, Chair Yeager and committee, and thank you, Assemblyman Orrin-Lineker, for taking on this very challenging issue. We appreciate your courage and fortitude in bringing this forward. I did submit to you earlier today some suggestions that I hope that we can discuss later, and they do include suggestions about including folks from the rural communities and from other disciplines. I just want to clarify, which I think may be a little lost in this, is that this subcommittee to the larger committee that is already existing is really meant to be a academic look at this issue as opposed to how the current committee is set up. Am I correct in my understanding?
David Orient-Licker for the record, that's correct. One, you may think about this as you have, as you say, the larger commission, and this would be kind of like a technical advisory task force to provide, focused information on one aspect of the problem that they're thinking about. So it's not intended to duplicate what the commission does, as opposed to provide specialized information for the commission.
Thank you for that, Mr.
Assemblyman, before we move on, I just wanted to recognize Professor Rolnick, who I think wanted to add something on that question.
Thank you, Chairman. Addie Rolnick from UNLV. So there's been a number of questions, and I appreciate this question about the focus of this task force, but a number of questions about the composition. And so I wanted to clarify sort of 2 aspects of those questions. So one is on there's a lot of suggestions for particular voices that might be good additions. So, for example, someone with expertise in policing in rural areas, or community members from certain areas. So those are good suggestions. I don't know that there's anything magical about the precise current list, which is to say that my understanding is that everyone involved is open to some discussions about exactly how different voices and perspectives would be represented. But to your larger question, I think you are correct. So this is not meant to duplicate other bodies. For example, the Advisory Commission is mostly made up. It helps to think of, when you think of policing, for example, you can think of system actors, right? If you're thinking of the criminal justice system, and then you can think of people in the community, what we might call community members who are impacted by the system. And then you can sort of think of academics or policy analysts outside. And so our existing mechanisms draw heavily on the system actors. So their representation, we've had questions about the district attorney, about law enforcement representatives. So we do a good job, I think, in the state at drawing from the expertise of the people involved in the system to find out what it is that will work. But it is, I think it's success when reforms are successful, they are a combination of the experiences of system actors and then sort of outside researchers, which is to say that researchers' job is to take a step back, to compare how things have happened in other jurisdictions, to look at how various aspects of the system function together and to sort of take a larger view. And then there's a third voice, which would be sort of impacted community members. So I think that there's a lot of conversations that could be had about precisely the makeup of the commission, but the purpose of the task force, is to be a research body and an academic and policy advisory body. So to look into these questions, we can harness significant, the ability to do significant research and the time to do significant research if it's primarily composed of academics, and it's not, it can take input from those involved or having a stake in how the system works, but it's designed to actually do something different than some of these other bodies. So that might speak to some of the other questions that we've had about why certain people aren't included, or does it duplicate what is already there? It's meant to do something different. So you're correct.
Thank you very much, Professor Rolnick, and thank you, Chair Yeager. If I could just expound a little.
Please.
I think that although this might appear to be unwieldy, if you look at it as if they were in a part of the existing committee, I think that the role that Assemblyman Ornlicker is trying to get at is notable, and I think that it is an important perspective because, as Ms. Rolnick has said, the current status is always people who are part of the system, and when we bring other voices in who aren't in it, who aren't affected by it, how the system works, it is helpful for them to see from a distance what is happening and sort of look at it as an overview. And I think that there is some benefit to us using our wonderful educational institutions to help us get some insights on what we can do. And I don't believe that that has any type of innate bias in that. It's just academic. And we hope that that the academic process will help us inform better solutions. I did have one more question, if somebody could help me clarify that initial charging document. Is it a consistent form that is used throughout all of our law enforcement agencies? Do they have a form that they use where we could quickly redact information so that we could have this blind charging? I know it's unwieldy, and I know that it's at this point without software, it could be a little time consuming. But first, is there one form? And is anybody counting up the cost in life, what it means when a person is overcharged? And I think that that's being missed in this. And I'd like to speak to that. When a person is overcharged in the beginning of this process, if they don't have the wherewithal, either with legal counsel or their own uh, innate or self-understanding of how to get this system to work, they could be charged on something that could hugely ruin their life. And I think there has to be some real honest discussion about what that means at the beginning to be severely overcharged and then have to fight to bring the charges down to what is reasonable, when that shouldn't be the case at all. That we should be that we know that there's bias here. And this is very frustrating to me personally, because I know this exists and maybe people don't understand, but I think that we need to have an real honest conversation. There's been plenty of studies that show that this has a real life-changing effect on people, Black people, brown people. Overcharging is a huge thing. And if the charging statements can be redacted to make this playing field even, if I have to use whiteout and a marker to save somebody's life, then we should use whiteout and a marker.
And Assemblywoman, I want to go back to your question. I don't think we had a chance to have somebody answer that. I think the question was, are the charging documents, are they consistent, or is there one document in use throughout the state? I think the answer to that is no, but I don't want to answer the question because I'm not presenting the bill. So I want to go to somebody to answer that. Maybe Ms. Birchie, it looks like you unmuted. So if you'd like to comment on that, please.
Kendra Birchie, for the record, through you, Chair Yeager, to Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong. Unfortunately, no, they're not all the same. And just to clarify, it's not just one document that the district attorneys would get, and I'm sure they'll expand on this in their testimony. But the probable cause reports or the police reports, they are different by jurisdiction. So in some, it's as simple as there's a box area where they just click the box regarding race, and others where it's something that's typed in.
Okay, we have time for a couple more questions because we do have some testimony that folks want to give on this bill. But I want to go next to Assemblyman Wheeler, who's been patiently waiting. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Yeager. I appreciate it. And there's never been anything patient about me. So, but I'm wondering, I actually have a kind of two connected questions here. On the charging, everybody keeps saying, well, it's a whiteout and a Sharpie and then copy the paper. I'm pretty sure that the charging officers use video evidence quite a bit to decide what charge to give, whether that be body camera, surveillance video, etc. So now redacting a video is not impossible, but it is time consuming, it is tough. So while you put that person in jail waiting arraignment, because you haven't brought the charges yet, he's just under arrest on suspicion of, how long do we wait while we redact all this and let a bureaucratic government run it through their steps to make sure everything is redacted? And how do we affect this person's right for a speedy trial? Also, the second part of my question is, I know that district attorneys use their own investigators. So when they see something, they will send that investigator out and maybe look at more charges, et cetera, than what the charging officer gave. So since that investigator works for the district attorney office, who is the charging officer, as put in this statement here, would the investigator no longer be able to look at these videos or look at descriptions or talk to witnesses about descriptions? So I'm seeing this as a logistic nightmare, to be honest with you. And whoever would like to answer that.
Assemblywoman Orlicker, thank you for your question. And I'll invite Ms. Birchie if she would like to. But the bill itself only requires redactions from documents because, as Assemblyman Wheeler points out, it would be much more challenging to redact a videotape. It's my understanding that it's an uncommon situation where the video footage is viewed before the charging decision, but if we understand we might not be able to reach 100% of cases, but if we can reach 99% or 95%, I think that's very important.
And Kendra Birchie, for the record, just to add to that, Chair Yeager, through you to Assemblyman Wheeler, regarding the issue of the bail hearings, just for your information, the bail hearings, according to Valdez Jimenez, should actually occur prior to that charging decision. So that would get the 72-hour hearing. And that's something that we'll be hearing, I'm sure, more. And we discussed in our presentation that the issue of prompt is still up for debate. But the way that the system's supposed to work is that that person's supposed to be able to have their Valdez Jimenez, their bail hearing prior to even when the district attorney has made that final charging decision. But I do agree with the statements that that Assemblyman Orentlicker made, where that's the reason why this is specific to blind charging for the documents, because of the issues that arise with body camera footage and surveillance videos and trying to redact those.
Okay, thank you. The way I understand it, I know we have a chairman here who dealt in this quite a bit, so maybe he can set me straight. But the bail hearing is you have to have initial charges for the bail hearing, otherwise the bail cannot be set to the crime. And then from there, of course, they go on with other charges. Isn't that correct?
Sometimes. It depends. And I don't want to speak to that because I haven't practiced in that area in a while, but I believe we might have someone on the phone in testimony who can address that question, Assemblyman Wheeler. I will just say, to answer your first part of your question, we have differences around the state. That's going to surprise nobody. But in Clark County in particular, they have dedicated attorneys, and all they do is work in screening, which basically means they review arrest reports and they make all the charging decisions. So they have dedicated folks, and that's their whole job. So they wouldn't have an investigator who is making that determination. Now, I can't speak to the rest of the state. I believe the rest of the state doesn't have the luxury of that many employees to be able to dedicate folks to the charging decisions. So that's certainly something that has to be taken into account if this bill were to move forward.
Yes, sir. We don't have that out here in the sticks.
I didn't think so, Assemblyman. We're going to take a couple more questions before we go to testimony. Assemblywoman Hardy, did you have a question? I thought I saw your hand up earlier, and if so, I apologize for making you wait so long to ask.
That's okay. Mr. Wheeler asked most of my questions. It was regarding, would they still be able to view video or surveillance, photos, things like that in making these decisions?
Great. And I think we have a question from Assemblywoman Gonzalez as well.
Hi, thank you so much, Chair. Assemblywoman Gonzalez, Assembly District 16 for the record. Is there any point throughout the process where a district attorney will get a case and then they can go back and change the charges? So while the intent is to provide no racial discrimination, as a district attorney, if I get a case, is there any point where in that process I can change, and then will I know the person's race at that point when that happens, if that makes sense?
Ms. Birchie, do you want to take that? Please go ahead.
Yes, Kendra Birchie, for the record, through you, Chair Yeager, to Assemblywoman Gonzalez. And I'm sure the district attorneys will hit on this more, but yes, they can change and amend charges, and that can be done even as late as at the preliminary hearing. So they do have that ability. And yes, you are correct that they would presumably know the person's race at that point if they're doing it like during the hearing.
Thank you so much. May I have a follow-up, Chair?
Please go ahead.
So in the places where they have implemented this, have they seen that happen where they can go back and change, and then, people of color are disproportionately impacted more? Like, are we seeing that trend at all by any chance?
That might be a question for Ms. Bacon, maybe, who I think knows probably more about this topic than anyone on the call. So Ms. Bacon, if you're able to answer that question, please go ahead.
Of course. Thank you, Chairman Yeager, and to you through to the Assemblywoman. I wanted to make an initial note on the video. In other jurisdictions, my understanding is that if the police wanted to provide a video in advance, they could say simply in the police report, and the video identifies the suspect. So then, you know, the charging attorney has the benefit of knowing, okay, there's also a video that identifies the suspect. And as Assemblyman Orentlicker stated, obviously that could be reviewed later, and or this could, you know, if we reach 99 or 98%, that would still be quite good. And then as to the next question, district attorneys certainly maintain the ability to change the charge. What this bill is trying to do is fight a lot of implicit bias. So the bill requires that if you're going to change the charge, you have to put the initial charging decision in the file. And if you're going to change the charging decisions, you just have to record in the file while you're doing that. Implicit bias is the result of automatic decision making because you have 10,000 decisions to make in a day. And to help streamline that, you start putting people and things in buckets. By having to slow down and record the reason why you're changing your decision and what the difference is, and having to state, okay, well, we received 10 more witness statements that positively identified this person as compared to, you know, we had 2 rocky witness statements before. That alone interrupts a lot of that implicit bias. So this certainly doesn't change. If someone is racist or trying to do something, yes, the system can be gamed. But this, a lot of the intent of the bill, at least from my understanding, is interrupting that implicit bias. And you are more likely to interrupt that bias if you've made the initial charging decision without race information, and then you have to record a reason why you've changed your mind. It forces your brain to slow down and stop those automatic processes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Before we move on to testimony committee, I had a few questions. I'm going to call this the shotgun round because I think these will be simple questions, but I wanted to help with some of the legislative intent. So I'll just go ahead and ask, in the task force we're talking about, do we anticipate that all the members who would be appointed would be Nevada residents? Some of them are specified as certain people who obviously would live in Nevada, but for instance, we have a social scientist with research experience in hate groups. And so I'm just curious if we have folks who would fit some of these categories in Nevada, or if not, was the intent to perhaps go outside of the state's borders to find those individuals?
Mr. Chairman, I can address this question for the record. This is Professor Shallin. Yes, we do have some specific individuals in mind who have published on the interfaces between the police and some of the extremist groups with lots of important data, who is a member of a department at the University of Nevada. So I believe that while the ultimate decision belongs to the legislators and the governor, we do have some specific individuals in mind who are residents of Nevada. Thank you.
Thank you for
Shallin once again. Mm-hmm.
Yes, thank you for that response. And then sticking on the task force, when I look down at section 5, it talks about what the task force is tasked to do. And I see reference to statewide guidelines, examining guidelines. And so my question there is, was the intent that this task force, whatever they came up with, would it have the force of law and policy, or would that then be up to the decision makers in the state to decide whether to implement guidelines that were produced from the task force?
Mr. Chairman, I can speak to this if no one else wants to. So the task force would make recommendations.
Could you just state your name for the record?
Oh, I'm sorry, Addie Rolnick. The idea is that the task force would make recommendations, not that it would pass laws or identify anything that had the force of law. So it would do careful research, and that research would then be able to be a resource for lawmakers.
Okay, thank you. And then go ahead.
For the record, Dmitry Shallin, we are investigating best practices. And so we will be able to provide legislators with good quality vetted information for decisions they are to make. So as academics, as experts in the area of policy, policing accountability, we should be able to provide expertise which otherwise might not be available. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification. This will be the last question, and then I'll just have a comment before we move on. So when we go to Section 7 of the bill, that's the section where we're changing the age from 18 to 21, where a court is to consider youthfulness of particular individuals and also has the discretion to depart from a mandatory minimum by 35%. So maybe it's just a wording question, but the way that the law stands now, that provision in Section 7 provides for applies to individuals who are under the age of 18. So, of course, they're referred to as juveniles. That language is being stricken, and we're going to 21. And now we're using the phrase youthful and mature adult offenders or youthful adults. But it seems to me that we should still use the word juvenile. I mean, I just want to get the intent on the record that the intent isn't to say we're only going to look at this for individuals between 18 and 21. I think the intent was if you're under 21, then you should get this consideration. So I just wanted to ask Assemblyman Orentlicker, was that your intent that the current practice will continue? We're just augmenting who gets the consideration.
Assemblyman Orentlicker, for the record, your characterization is correct. And so if we need to revise the language, we'll do that. Thank you.
Thank you. And then just the comment that I had, I don't think it really needs a question, but when we talk about the blind sentencing in the amendment, on page 3 of the amendment, there's some new language being added where the identifying information that would be deleted includes the location of arrest, violation, and or residence. I think I understand the intent behind location of arrest and or residence, but it does seem to me that the location of the violation might be something pertinent for a charger to have in front of them. And I'm just thinking about an example, if someone goes into a commercial establishment and starts sort of randomly committing crimes, that's very different than, if there's like an individual confrontation out in front of somebody's yard. So I don't think we need to discuss that any further, but I think I might want to consider keeping location of the violation in as something that might be pertinent to a charging decision. So I'll just simply make that suggestion. And committee, we've taken about an hour of questions, so I think it is time to move on to some testimony because we do have folks who are interested in this bill. So to the presenters and those who helped answer questions, thank you for being here with us. We'll ask you to hold tight for a little bit while we go to testimony on the bill itself. At this point, I'll open up testimony in support on Assembly Bill 243. We've had a number of folks on the Zoom answer questions, but want to make sure, was there anybody else on the Zoom who wanted to provide testimony in support of Assembly Bill 243? I think I have everyone on one screen finally. Ms. Birchie, did you want to say something in support?
Yes, I just want to add Kendra Birchie for the record with the Washoe County Public Defender's Office. Our office supports this bill, and we really appreciate the Assemblyman's hard work on ensuring that we take the great criminal justice reforms that we made last session and continue them this session into a different aspect of the criminal justice system. We do believe that the task force, as well as the blind charging decisions, will help to curb the implicit bias to make our system more fair and equitable and to rebuild trust in our criminal justice system. So thank you.
Thank you for your testimony and support, Ms. Birchie. Anybody else on the Zoom who would like to provide testimony in support? Okay, I'm not seeing anybody. BPS, could we please go to the phone lines and see if there are individuals there in support? I believe there are. And please take the first caller in support.
To testify in support of AB 243, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Again, to testify in support of AB 243, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 725. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Thank you, Chair Yeager and committee members. This is Nick Shepak, N-I-C-K-S-H-E-P-A-C-K, Policy and Program Associate with the ACLU of Nevada. We are testifying in strong support of AB 243 today, and thank Assemblyman Orentlicker for bringing this bill. One of the oldest and most recognizable symbols of justice is that of Lady Justice, blindfolded with a balanced scale in one hand and a sword in the other. She symbolizes the ideal system of justice. Unfortunately, we have not reached that ideal system of justice. We have unceremoniously stripped the blindfold from her face, tipped her scale, and thrust her sword into the heart of our most vulnerable community. The system is in fact so far from blind that youth legislator Melendez has spent months working on this bill. At her young age, she has become acutely aware that the justice system designed to protect her acts as a steel trap for our Black and brown community members, disproportionately punishing them for behavior no different than their white counterparts. The opposition will say that the implementation of this bill will be hard, that it will be tedious and time-consuming, and that it will cost more than we think. While these are valid points, we must take a step back and ask the community how hard it is to continue with disparate sentencing based on race. Ask how tedious it is to navigate a system rife with racial bias. We must ask what has been lost to an unblind system of justice and how much this system has cost the community. I ask you to place the needs of the community on one side of Lady Justice's scale and the bureaucratic difficulties of the DA's office on the other side and see which way it tips. Lastly, we must be honest. In every conversation about reform, the community, the defense bar, and the advocates are always greatly outnumbered by law enforcement. We ask that you support this bill, support impacted communities, and support blind justice. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Shepak. BPS, let's take the next caller in support, please.
Caller with the last three digits, 377. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning. My name is Deshaun Jackson, DASHUN Good morning, Chairman Yeager and committee members. Again, my name is Deshaun Jackson. I serve as the Director of Children's Safety and Welfare Policy with the Children's Advocacy Alliance. And on behalf of the Children's Advocacy Alliance, I speak in support of AB 243. We believe this bill is essential to ensuring that all youth, despite their race, is treated equally. We also believe this bill moves in the right direction of breaking down racial biases and disparities. Thank you so much, committee, for hearing this.
Thank you for your testimony and support, Mr. Jackson. BPS, could we take the next caller, please?
Caller with the last three digits, 130. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Christine Saunders. That's CHRISTINE, SAUNDERS, and I'm a policy director with the Progressive Leadership Alliance Nevada, also representing the Nevada Immigrant Coalition this morning in support of Assembly Bill 243. The global pandemic and rise of the Black Lives Matter movement have created a watershed moment for change. Thousands of Nevadans have taken to the streets to demand an end to racist policing and police violence. We want to thank Assemblyman Orentlicker for this important bill to address the systemic racism and clear disparities in the criminal justice system that over-criminalize communities of color. And while we still appreciate the legislature having introduced a number of police reform measures this session, 120 days is obviously not enough to solve the problem. AB 243 will create an ongoing space for this discussion to occur with a diverse group of stakeholders and experts. We urge your support of this bill. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Saunders. BPS, let's take the next caller in support, please.
Caller with the last three digits, 611. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning, Chairman Yeager and members of the committee. This is John Piro, JOHNPIRO, from the Clark County Public Defender's Office. I'd like to thank you for hearing this bill and just bring a few issues to light. The Review Journal just published an article on civilian review boards, and this is why that task force proposed in AB 243 is necessary. Frequently, the civilian review board's recommendations have no real power. They go to the sheriff, but the sheriff gets to do whatever he wants, and nobody is keeping statistics on the percent of times the sheriff has implemented the civilian review board's recommendation. Secondly, the civilian review board, sorry, I can say that, can't conduct their own investigations and have to rely on internal affairs. And internal affairs sometimes bends over backwards to side with an officer, even going so far as providing excuses for their conduct. Thirdly, evidence collection takes too long for the civilian review boards, up to several months, which could sometimes result in loss of videos and evidence. The question that needs to be asked, and I think has come to light recently, is who is watching the watchman? And this bill provides for somebody to watch the watchman. It is no longer okay for them to police themselves and say there are no problems, but then secondarily say, well, everybody is really upset with law enforcement. It's time for us to address that, and I believe the task force would do that. The other two parts of this bill are very important as well. In 2016, we all realized that overt racism is way bigger of a problem than we all thought, but we all knew that implicit racial bias was hiding within the crevices. Blind charging helps us work on that issue. And as Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong said, it's a small cost to pay to work on justice. And to address Mr. O'Neill's question, Assemblyman O'Neill's question, if our study finds out that we're doing things right, then good for us. That shouldn't stop us from studying the issue, though. And lastly, the part of the bill deals with youthful offenders and recognizes them as youth and gives the judges permission to do that. That is also a good policy. Thank you for hearing this bill, and I urge its passage.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Pirro. BPS, let's take the next caller in support, please.
Caller with the last three digits, 630. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning, Chair Yeager and members of the committee. My name is Caleb Green, CALEB-GREEN, and I'm the chair of the Racial Justice Committee for the Las Vegas chapter of the National Bar Association, also known as LVNBA. I'm here to support Assembly Bill 243. I want to thank Assemblyman Orentlicker and the presenters, including Mary Bacon and Addie Rolnick, for bringing this bill and doing a great job in presenting it this morning. I'd like to lead my remarks this morning by pointing out that on August 6, 2020, the state of Nevada adopted SCR1, a resolution that urged public action and recognized racism as a public health crisis. Namely, that resolution provides that systemic racism and structures of racial discrimination create generational poverty and perpetuate debilitating economic, educational, and health hardship and disproportionately affect people of color, causing the single most profound economic and social challenge facing Nevada. And we believe that Assembly Bill 243 seeks to address several aspects of this underlying institutional racism addressed in SCR1 that has adversely impacted our criminal justice system. Now, we believe that it is very well established that Black and African Americans are subject to higher levels of criminalization and harsher collateral consequences in sentencing in comparison to their other counterparts. The LVNBA, it is clear that implicit racial bias and prejudice of prosecutors in the criminal charging system have exacerbated the disparate effects of the criminal justice system on Black and Brown communities. We believe that AB Assembly Bill 243 will mitigate implicit bias and the implications of race from the decisions to charge and prosecute. This will also mitigate implicit bias by establishing a race-blind charging system for all Nevada prosecuting officers to use when deciding whether charges should be filed against the person. Put simply, criminal charges should be based upon behavior, not the race and any other demographic information related to the accused. And this bill captures this very squarely, and therefore we urge your support for this bill. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Green. VPS, let's take the next caller in support, please.
Caller with the last three digits, 556. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Anne Marie Grant, ANNEMARIEGRANT. My brother was killed by police in Reno, hogtied and asphyxiated to death during a mental health crisis. I'd like to thank the sponsors of this bill and all involved in its creation. I support this bill fully, especially since the amendment includes someone directly impacted by police violence who lives in Nevada, as they are subject matter experts and their input in police reform should be valued. Some families truly hope something families truly hope for is change, not just talking about it, but taking actual impactful steps towards that. And I feel this bill does that. And some victims want to be a meaningful part of that change. I have seen the success of advisory boards such as the Advisory Commission on the Administration of Justice and recommendations made to your legislature by them. The idea that a task force will be there to hold law enforcement agencies accountable and not leave it up to the agencies themselves is a huge step towards greater transparency and provides hope. I also believe this suggested makeup for the board will provide various impactful insight. I also support and appreciate race-blind charging system. Justice should be an even playing field for all. If you need an impacted Nevadan, I can direct you towards many. Thank you again for sponsoring this bill, and please support it.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Grant. BPS, let's take the next caller in support, please.
Caller with the last three digits, 085. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin. Caller with the last three digits, 085. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You may press *6 to unmute yourself. Caller 085.
My name is Kostan Lathoris, KOSTAN-LATHOURIS. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the Assembly Judiciary Committee. I am testifying today in support of AB 243. I support the creation of the Nevada Police Reform Advisory Task Force because I believe it's important to evaluate and study the system of criminal justice in Nevada. If we have the experts, we should include them in the study and recommendations regarding criminal justice. I'm an enrolled member of a federally recognized Indian tribe, and I'm also an elected official with that tribe. However, today I am testifying in my personal capacity as an attorney who has practiced almost exclusively for over 5 years, regarding federal, Indian, and tribal law. And that's why I believe it's important that we include a legal scholar with indigenous people as part of the task force, and why I also think it's important that we include someone who's familiar with issues related to police relations with minority communities, especially those in Indian country. Criminal justice in Indian country can be complicated and inconsistent and unfortunately unfair, not necessarily as a result of state law, but federal law, which has limited the inherent sovereignty of tribes, including over non-Indians within reservations, which oftentimes leaves tribes dependent on states to be able to enforce certain laws within Indian country. Now, problems can also arise with state law enforcement when there is a lack of understanding of Indian country, because, again, laws in Indian country can be complicated and confusing. In particular, I've experienced working on a case with my own tribe and the Office of the Tribal Attorney, where we had a county sheriff try to enforce civil regulatory laws over our members. Now, under certain laws, they're not able to do that. And although we thought the case would be easily resolved, what ended up happening was the local law enforcement, the state law enforcement, challenged the creation and existence of our reservation boundaries. That caught us completely off guard, and we didn't understand why they took that position. But that case resulted in 6 years of litigation, ultimately being filed cert with the Supreme Court, which denied cert, thankfully, and the tribe was able to successfully defend its boundaries of the reservation. Now, that case involved federal law, civil rights violations, and again, the challenge to the reservation boundaries, which we found to be completely unacceptable. We believe that the creation of a task force, or I believe the creation of a task force that includes people that have experience in Indian country, again, like a legal scholar with indigenous people, could help address these issues going forward so these types of issues don't happen with tribes in Nevada. Criminal justice issues can also be addressed in a good way, and best practices can be developed when states have a good understanding of Indian country and tribes in the state can work together. And this would allow for more consistent and fair application of law enforcement in an Indian country. And I believe that this is best accomplished by creating bridges between policy experts, including those in Indian country and regarding Indian country, and the policymakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony in support, Mr. Lathoris. BPS, let's take the next caller in support, please.
Caller with the last three digits, 080. Please slowly state spell your name for the record. Please begin.
Hi, Jim Hoffman for Nevada Attorneys for Criminal Justice. NACJ supports this bill because Nevada has an ongoing problem with racism in policing. Here's one example based in real statistics from an ACLU study. In 2010, Black Nevadans were 4 times as likely to be arrested for marijuana possession as white people, despite the fact that Black and white people use marijuana at the same rates. After marijuana was legalized, those numbers improved, but not by much. Today, Black people are 3 times as likely to be arrested for marijuana possession as white people. In some counties, this is much higher. For instance, the most recent numbers from Douglas County show that Black people are 22 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana possession as white people. This is just a snapshot of one offense only involving Black and white people. But we know anecdotally this problem exists in many different areas of policing and also harms Indigenous people, Latinos, and people of other races. And we know that this is persistent. From 2010 to 2018, the numbers only went from 4 times as many to 3 times as many. So this is a problem that our state's existing policies, our existing framework of the ACAJ hasn't been able to really address. The task force and the other provisions of AB 243 will help us understand why this disparity is happening and address it so that justice is truly fair and equal for everyone. For that reason, NACJ supports this bill. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony and support, Mr. Hoffman. BPS, please take the next caller in support.
Thank you, Chair. We are currently taking testimony for AB 243. Please press star 9 to take your place in the queue. Again, we are taking testimony for AB 243 in support. Please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 037. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Tanya Brown, TONJABROWN. Good morning, members of the Judiciary. We are in strong support of this bill. Under Section 7, we would like to see the word retroactively to be applied retroactively. I will say that, nowadays we know a lot about mental health issues. 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, we didn't. And we have individuals still serving time in our prisons who had gone misdiagnosed for many, many years and who have been in for decades. And how does that compare to what the current situation would be if this bill passes and moves forward without making it retroactive? With the, I'm not sure if you are familiar with the case, and I think this should be part of the task force into looking into cases and trying to figure out some things, not just dealing with the law enforcement. I want to refer to the David Webb case. I don't know if you are familiar with it, but it was a case here in Carson City some years ago where a Black man, David Webb, was arrested by the police. The police had a suspect. He was described as being Black. They came across Mr. David Webb. He was apprehended, put in jail, and shortly thereafter, the police realized that they actually had the wrong guy in jail. So they went to the district attorney here in Carson City, and at the time, it was the Chief Deputy District Attorney, Ann Langer. She informed the officers he would not be released unless he signed a waiver not to sue the city for his false arrest. Mr. Webb flat out refused, and ultimately he did sue, and they did settle, and they actually did get the actual suspect. Anyways, now this district attorney or a chief deputy DA is now the Story County district attorney. So I think we should be looking at civil lawsuits where things like this happen and then do a comparison with, for example, that district attorney and how she proceeds to charge certain individuals, because she does have
Miss Brown, could you please limit your comments to the bill, and could you please wrap up?
Oh, yes. Okay. And then also under Section 4(2)H, it says an individual impacted by police violence. It doesn't say it has to be a Nevada. And if that's the case, I would strongly recommend that Miss Anne Marie Grant apply for that position. I think she'd be wonderful. Also, I think they should do a comparison, like I said, make this retroactive because maybe it will help those individuals who've been in for 40 years, who were 17 or 18, 19 years old, a chance, the opportunity to get out. Thank you very much and have a wonderful day.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Brown. BPS, please take the next caller in support.
If you have recently joined the call and would like to testify in support of AB 243, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no more callers in support of AB 243 at this time.
Thank you so much, BPS. I'm going to close testimony in support of the bill. I will now open up testimony in opposition to Assembly Bill 243. I don't believe we have anyone joining us today on the Zoom who is in opposition, but BPS, I think we have some folks on the phone who'd like to offer opposition testimony, so please let's go there and take the first caller.
To testify in opposition of AB 243, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Again, we are taking testimony in opposition of AB 243. Please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 389. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and members of the committee. My name is Jennifer Noble, JenniferNoble, and I am testifying today on behalf of the Washoe County District Attorney's Office and the Nevada District Attorneys Association in opposition to AB 243. I'd like to begin by thanking Assemblyman Orenlicker and Ms. Bacon for meeting with us to discuss the bill and hear our concerns. I want to let this committee know some of the considerations that we undertook prior to taking a position on this bill. We met, as I said, with Assemblyman Orenlicker and Ms. Bacon, and we also chatted with faculty from Stanford about the concept of a race-blind charging system. When the concept of the bill was first brought to us, it was with the idea that Stanford had a free software program that could facilitate so-called blind charging by making redaction automated. But it quickly became apparent that the software requirements and specifications are not something that any Nevada District Attorney's Office can meet. And importantly, Stanford's study using an implicit bias algorithm failed to demonstrate any statistically different racial outcomes after implementation of blind charging. When we asked about that, the explanation was essentially that San Francisco prosecutors are more enlightened or more sensitive to the issue of implicit bias than Nevada prosecutors. There is no support for this hypothesis. This lack of evidence is important, especially when the committee is considering a bill that will put onerous requirements on prosecutors' offices. We take our oaths as prosecutors very seriously and are ever mindful that it is our duty to protect the safety of our community, including every member of our community, regardless of race, creed, ethnicity, or religion. We are all Nevadans, and we take the issue of implicit bias very seriously. But this bill does not simply require that DAs and city attorneys engage in race-blind charging. It's requiring us to engage in evidence-blind charging. And I say that because prosecutors are not allowed in making their initial charging decision to consider critical information, such as the criminal history of the arrested person, witness statements, body-worn camera footage, and surveillance footage. We can't even know what the person was booked on. Reasoned case evaluation and prosecutorial discretion just can't occur in this informational vacuum. So we will have to make a full case evaluation a second time with the previously redacted information included, record any changes in our charging decision, and offer an explanation for those changes. This will happen in each case. Support staff will spend many hours each day combing through police reports and pretrial assessments to redact all the required demographic information. We do not have the time or the personnel to do this, but using Adobe Acrobat, we did some test runs on how long it would take an experienced secretary supervisor to redact the information contemplated by the bill. And this was sort of in line with some of the questions that were asked, so I'll quickly give a couple of examples. The first case is a felony attempted robbery. It took her 11 minutes to redact the information, and this is prior to the additional requirements imposed by the amendment today. Another felony robbery took 25 minutes. A murder, 30 minutes. A misdemeanor domestic battery also took 30 minutes. These time redactions, as I said, were prior to the additional requirements in the amendment, which also require redaction of the officer's name, arresting charges, etc. In just Washoe County, these redactions would have to be done on an average of 9,584 cases per year. It's my understanding that in Clark County, the redaction process would be applied to about 35,000 cases per year. And please keep in mind, when the defense discussed the issue of redaction, they are typically redacting information like social security numbers, etc. They are not redacting all the additional information required by this bill. In Washoe County, we will have to create a screening division and get rid of our lateral prosecution model. And we think this model protects our community better because the same prosecutors assigned to offenders each time they offend, which better informs the prosecutor in their charging decisions and plea negotiations with that defendant. But with this bill, DDAs who charge cases also cannot cover Valdez-Jimenez hearings and detention hearings because they will see defendants in person and learn the arresting officer's identity, booking charges, and the defendant's criminal history, etc., prior to charging. This means our DDAs aren't fungible and we're going to need more of them. This bill is well-meaning, it is an academic exercise, but it is utterly unworkable in Nevada District Attorney's offices. Justice delayed is justice denied, and the deleterious effects on our ability to do our job and meet constitutional and statutory deadlines will be severely hobbled. This is not a money committee, so I will refrain from discussing the fiscal implications of these onerous requirements. I'm almost done, but I'd like to again reiterate, we take this issue of implicit bias very seriously, but we do not have the privilege of operating in the world of academia, of studies and hypotheses. We operate in the world of devastated victims, shattered lives, near impossible caseloads, and constitutional and statutory deadlines that are non-negotiable. AB 243 fails to consider or provide prosecutors with any tools that would make its requirements workable in the real world. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Noble. I gave you a little bit more time, but I will note that we have several other callers in opposition. So for future callers, if you could please try to limit your comments to 2 minutes, that'll allow us to get through everybody before we move on. BPS, please let's take the next caller in opposition.
Caller with the last 3 digits, 292. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Yeager, members of the committee. My name is Jessica Walsh, JESSICAWALSH, and I am speaking on behalf of the Clark County District Attorney's Office in opposition to AB 243. I am in charge of our case assessment unit and oversee those making charging decisions with our office. I first want to thank Assemblywoman Ornt-Lichter for meeting with representatives of our office to discuss this bill. I also want to let the committee know that we did meet with Alex Cholis-Wood, the executive director of the Stanford Computational Policy Lab, who developed the blind charging program. Additionally, we read his study on his implicit bias algorithm. It's important to note that neither his published study nor any of his follow-up research has shown any statistically different racial outcomes after the implementation of blind charging. This is important to note when we're talking about a bill that places onerous requirements on prosecutors. My screening deputies make thoughtful, fact-based charging decisions after reviewing photos and videos, reading victim statements, talking to officers, and yes, reading the declaration of arrest. Additionally, some of the information to be redacted in the conceptual amendment are often elements of the crime itself. It could be entirely inappropriate and unethical in some cases to make even an initial charging decision without being provided that information. Our submissions process is not compatible with the program that would automatically redact the information, as it does not work with a PDF, leaving us to make the required redactions manually. Considering all that we review, there's no way the Clark County District Attorney's Office could undertake the requirements of AB 243 without a significant investment in new staff. We do not feel that this is a significant investment is good policy, considering there's no evidence that we are engaged in biased charging decisions. The same deputies who screen the cases are also the deputies who currently appear in the initial appearance court in Las Vegas Justice Court. Our office has taken great efforts to expedite our charging decisions to coincide with initial appearance court, resulting in approximately 20% of offenders being released within 1 day of their arrest. This would no longer be possible given the requirements of AB 243. Our office takes questions of implicit bias and racial disparities in the criminal justice system very seriously. A few years ago, we began training on the issue of implicit bias and even brought in a UNLV professor as an instructor. Finally, I want to invite any of you who want to tour our screening division to sit with a deputy, see what we do and how we do it. John Jones and I are more than happy to facilitate that for you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Walsh. BPS, please take the next caller in opposition.
Caller with the last three digits, 248. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning. Mark Scifalacqua, MARC-SCHIF-ALACQUA. For the City of Henderson, we would like to thank the bill sponsor and appreciate his time that he provided city staff. I do concur with the comments of Ms. Noble and Ms. Walsh. I would add that under Nevada's constitutional separation of powers clause, the powers of the government of our state are, as you know, are divided into three co-equal departments. The executive branch encompasses the responsibility to carry out and enforce laws. And while there may be overlap between the branches to some degree, one branch may not directly interfere with the essential functions of another. The decision to whether to prosecute or not has been called a special province or core function of the executive branch. And so long as the prosecutor has probable cause to believe that the defendant committed an offense, the decision whether or not to prosecute and what charge to file generally rests entirely with the prosecutor. Well-meaning as it may be, this bill would represent a direct interference with those core duties of the executive branch, as it would regulate how a prosecutor could initially read information, and then it would dictate what mental impressions a prosecutor must write down on every file. A law should not interfere with this deliberative process and dictate how a prosecutor notates his or her mental impressions in a case, which would constitute work product and wouldn't be discoverable anyway. To justify directly intervening with the screening process, the bill promotes blindness as a means to counteract discriminatory decision-making. But just saying something doesn't make it so. Where is the proof of discrimination in the screening process in Nevada? While discrimination in our country is certainly real, there is no showing that there's any discrimination in the case assessment process in any prosecutorial office in the state, and no court has ever found such. Of course, a prosecutor's discretion is always subject to constitutional constraints, and there's always legal remedies if discretion is abused through the court system, the state bar, or through an employer. Simply, prosecutors judge cases on their facts, and prosecutors need as many of those facts right away in the assessment process. Mandating several extra steps to an internal process will just slow everything down. We have an obligation to review the entire report, and we don't want to guess when making these decisions. Holding back information such as the location of the crime or the crime even itself would not promote a fair legal process, since you need to review the unredacted report to make sure you even have jurisdiction to file the charge and know what charge you're filing. We want to do the right thing. Blind justice is a symbolic goal, but it would not be served by this bill. I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for your comments, your testimony, Mr. Scifalacqua. BPS, let's take the next caller in opposition, please.
Caller with the last three digits, 668. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning, Chair Yeager, members of the committee. My name is Troyce, Troyce, last name Krumme, Krumi, and I am the Vice Chairman of the Las Vegas Police Managers and Supervisors Association. We are currently in opposition to AB 243 as written, based on the task force. We are not against a task force itself or against effective police reform, but we need to ensure that any task force that is advising on reform is designed in such a way to identify proven best practices and not changes based on narrative. Questions must be asked and answered regarding the motivations for why any and all of the expertises that were selected were chosen to make up that board. It also appears that not enough input from Nevada law enforcement was heard prior to the drafting of this bill. Affected stakeholders should be brought in for additional input. We encourage those working on the bill to contact affected stakeholders from law enforcement, criminal defense, prosecution, and members of the community for future input before any implementation of this bill. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony in opposition, Mr. Krumi. BPS, let's take the next caller in opposition.
Caller with the last three digits, 595. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Thank you. My name is Ed Poleski, EDPOLESKI. I'm the Assistant City Attorney in charge of the Criminal Division of the Las Vegas City Attorney's Office. I'm testifying today in opposition of AB 243 as written, specifically Section 8 of the bill. I've been a prosecutor for almost 30 years, and I've been a prosecutor for the city for almost 24 years. I can say unequivocally that race and ethnicity have no place in making charging decisions in criminal cases, and I can assure you that our office does not consider these factors in making our charging decisions. Our office processes and screens about 5,000 violent cases a year, including battery domestic violence cases, about 2,500 DUI cases, and thousands of other misdemeanor offenses in the city. When we screen a case, we are only looking for the elements of the alleged offense and whether they've been met. We currently have difficulty keeping up with our screening because of our large caseload and meeting upcoming court dates. This bill and the proposed amendment will make that task even more difficult. As was indicated earlier, we get all of our reports on paper. They will have to be scanned and then redacted. Every single case that we get, the thousands of cases we get, will have to be manually redacted by our staff. Every case will have to be screened twice, which will slow down the screening process and ultimately the court case. This will require additional staff, more attorneys. In fiscal year 2020, our office filed over 22,000 misdemeanor cases. That doesn't include the additional cases that we denied. All of these cases will have to be screened twice. The amendment to the bill requires that the location of the event be redacted, and we will not even know that we have jurisdiction in the matter, and we'll have to guess as to the proposed charges that the officer is presenting. As I indicated at the beginning, race, ethnicity, and physical descriptors should play no role in determining the filing of criminal charges in a criminal case. We look forward to working with the sponsors and coming up with workable amendments to the bill or other solutions to achieve its goal and to work with the that will work for the prosecutorial agencies around the state. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Poleski. BPS, let's take the next caller in opposition, please.
Caller with the last three digits, 294. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Chairman Yeager and members of the committee, for the record, Callie Wilsey with the City of Reno. We are in opposition today as we have a limited concern about how the charging system may inadvertently increase and duplicate clerical work for our police department. We met with Assemblyman Ornlicker and appreciate his willingness to consider an amendment to address this concern, and we'll be getting that over to him. We appreciate the opportunity to work with him and for the opportunity to testify today. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Wilsey. BPS, let's take the next caller in opposition, please.
Caller with the last three digits, 196. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning, Chairman and members of the Assembly Judiciary Committee. I'm Eric Spratley, ERICSPRATLEY for the Nevada Sheriffs and Chiefs Association. You've heard the logical explanations for opposition thus far. So we agree with those and how chaotic it would be to implement the provisions of this bill and the bias and unbalanced nature of the task force proposed. Nevada law enforcement leaders are supportive of the good public policy being proposed this session, such as the oversight provided by Assembly Bill 58, and are also supportive of transparency for our law enforcement agencies. This bill is not the mechanism as drafted or with the proposed amendment, so we are in opposition. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Spratley. BPS, I believe there might be a caller or two left in opposition. Could we take the next one, please?
Thank you, Chair. We are currently taking testimony in opposition of AB 243. Please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Again, we are currently taking testimony in opposition of AB 243. Please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last three digits, 456. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin. Again, caller with the last three digits, 456. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. And you may press star 6 to unmute yourself. Again, we have caller with the last three digits, 456. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning, Chairman Yeager and members of the committee. My name is AJ Delap with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. My last name is phonetically spelled David Easy Lincoln Adam Paul. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department is opposed to AB 243 in its introduced form or with the amendment, unfortunately. Specifically, Section 4 is our issue. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, known as LVMPD, is in full support of continued efforts by the community we serve to provide quality, constructive feedback as to how to best serve our community members. It is the goal of LVMPD to be the safest community in America. This goal can only be attained through partnerships with our community members. However, LVMPD does not support the creation of the task force described in Section 4. LVMPD echoes many of the concerns of Co-Chair Wynn. It is the position of LVMPD that the task force appears to create a conflict between the already well-functioning, well-led, and well-community represented Advisory Commission to the Administration of Justice and its subcommittees. Furthermore, it would be the position of LVMPD that if the task force is to be formed, that for purposes of equity for Nevada, there be memberships provided for representatives from the State Attorney General's Office, Clark County District Attorney's Office, Washoe County District Attorney's Office, Nevada District Attorneys Association, Nevada Sheriffs and Chiefs Association, and a victim's advocate. As we all know, Nevada is a very unique state. We have a very condensed and large population in southern Nevada, and yet some of the most remote and small communities in the country, and everything in between, it seems. Because of this, great consideration has to be taken to all legislation to ensure that the needs of the state as a whole can be met. With that, Chairman Yeager and members of the committee, I conclude my testimony. Thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Delep. BPS, do we have any other callers in opposition?
If you have recently joined the call and would like to testify in opposition of AB 243, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no more callers in opposition of AB 243 at this time.
Thank you, BPS. So that worked out nicely. We had 22 minutes of supportive testimony and 22 minutes of opposition testimony. I will now close opposition testimony. Let's see if there's anybody neutral on Assembly Bill 243. There's nobody on the Zoom. BPS, is there anyone on the phone line who is in the neutral position?
To testify in neutral on Bill AB 243, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Again, to testify in neutral of Bill AB 243, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers pressing star 9 for neutral at this time.
Thank you so much, BPS. I'm going to close neutral testimony, and I'm going to hand it back over to Assemblyman Orentlicker to provide concluding remarks on Assembly Bill 243.
Thank you, Chair Yeager. I'd first like to see if Ms. Birchie or Ms. Hopkins would like to say anything before I wrap up.
Kendra Birchie for the record. Again, I just want to thank Assemblyman Orentlicker for bringing this bill forward. As we heard, this is extremely good policy to ensure that we are charging in a way that is racially neutral. What we heard is that there aren't studies indicating that there is an issue in Nevada. However, as Assemblywoman Cohen mentioned in her remarks too, we do know from the studies done from CJI that there is an issue, and we believe that this is one of the ways to address this issue. It's unfortunate that our software systems right now are not compatible to use the free Stanford program. However, there are ways in order to ensure that justice is met in a timely fashion, that justice is met for every individual in this state. And so we would appreciate your support.
Thank you, Ms. Birchie. Ms. Hopkins, did you want to provide any concluding remarks? I think I saw a shake of a head no. So Assemblyman Orentlicker will go to you for the final word.
Thank you, Chair Yeager and members of the committee for the hearing today. As I indicated, we're interested in working with everybody to make sure we get this right. There are refinements we can make, and we want to get the details right, but we also want to make sure we don't lose sight of the forest and that we're basing on data and not misunderstandings. There is a problem. We don't doubt the good faith and efforts of our law enforcement officials in Nevada, but we have ample data indicating that race infects law enforcement decisions and in very unfair ways, and we need to address that. We know that Blacks and other minorities are sentenced more harshly, that's clear, and we know that charging decisions, unfair charging decisions, are a key factor in that. And, you know, I'm glad, as Mr. Skifalakwa pointed out, that there are remedies for, we can try to hold people accountable, but it's far more important to prevent the harms, as Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong pointed out. There are real people's lives that are devastated because of unfair charging decisions. The requirements of this bill are not onerous. We've done our tests, and it doesn't take a lot of time. And we're happy to work with the district attorney's offices to make sure they can implement this in a simple, non-burdensome way, because we're confident it can be. And it's critical that we have a fair justice system and that people are not treated differentially because of their race or ethnic origin. And we will work to make sure that happens. On the task force, again, we'll work to make sure we have the right membership, but it is a critical resource that we can draw on for our activities going forward. So thank you for your time today. I look forward, as I say, to working with everyone to make sure this is the best bill possible.
Thank you, Assemblyman, and thank you to your co-presenters who were here with you and those who were here with you to answer questions. We appreciate you spending some of your Friday morning with us and hope you have a great rest of the day. I will now close the hearing on Assembly Bill 243. That brings us to our final item on the agenda, which is public comment. Just by way of reminder, we reserve up to 30 minutes at the end of each meeting for public comment. Commenters will have 2 minutes to provide public comment. Public comment is a time to bring up matters of a general nature within the jurisdiction of the Assembly Judiciary Committee. BPS, let's go to the phone lines, please, and see if there's anybody with public comment this morning.
Thank you, Chair. We are currently taking public comment. To testify under public comment, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 035. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning, committee. My name is Quentin Savoy. That's Quentin. I'm the Deputy Director at Make It Work Nevada, a part of the Nevada Housing Justice Alliance. Nevada has one of the fastest eviction processes in the country, and this process is disproportionately impacting Black and Brown families. In 12 days, nearly 250,000 Nevadans will be at risk of eviction. We need a work session on AB 141 and a hearing for AB 161. Moving these bills forward will ensure we are able to protect Nevadan families, keep them in their homes, and secure their right to due process. Thank you very much for your time. Have a great weekend.
Thank you for your public comment, Mr. Savoy. BPS, are there additional callers for public comment this morning?
Yes, caller with the last 3 digits, 556. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Anne Marie Grant, ANNEMARIE Grant. My brother was killed by Reno police. Today I'd like to talk about Eric Scott. Eric Scott was killed on July 10th, 2010 while leaving a Costco's in Las Vegas by LVMPD officer William Mosher, who fired 2 rounds. Officer Joshua Stark and Thomas Mendiola also fired. Eric was hit a total of 7 times. A Costco loss prevention supervisor claimed Eric had a gun in his waistband and Costco prohibits weapons. The loss prevention staff also said that Eric did not threaten anyone inside the store, didn't act violently, and didn't remove the gun from his waistband. A handgun was later found still in its holster on the ground. Officer Mosher testified he didn't recall ordering Eric to drop the gun. Eric, who is now outside the store and would have been within his constitutional rights according to your state's Second Amendment laws to possess that gun, But a 911 recording did record that Mosher did command Eric to drop the weapon. In truth, Eric was leisurely walking out of that Costco that day. He wasn't posing a threat to anybody. He didn't make any aggressive movements. In fact, Mosher instructed Eric to drop the gun. Eric was surrounded by 3 officers. He turned around. He was compliant. He was told to drop the gun, and he did exactly that and was executed for it. Eric was the second community member killed by Officer Mosher. I'd like to tell you a little bit about Eric Scott as a human being. Eric was a veteran who attended the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, graduated in the top 10% of his class, and was a commissioned U.S. Army officer in May of 1994. He subsequently served as an M1A1 tank platoon leader with the 1st Cavalry. He left active duty during the post-Cold military drawdown and embarked on a successful career in medical and real estate sales. He was transferred to Las Vegas in 1999. Working in cardiovascular sales for Boston Scientific. While working full-time, he obtained a master's in business administration from Duke University's Fuqua School of Business, then branched into real estate. Eric was involved in a number of major projects in Las Vegas. He is loved and missed by his parents, Bill and Linda Scott, and his brother, Kevin Scott, and so many others. Please support bills that promote transparency and accountability from law enforcement. Thank you.
Thank you for your public comment, Ms. Grant. BPS, are there additional callers on the public comment line?
We are currently taking testimony for public comment. Please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, the public line is open and working. There are no more callers at this time.
Thank you, BPS, for all your help today in managing that testimony. Committee members, if you'll just hold tight for 1 second, I want to make sure we don't have any other committee business before us this morning before we adjourn. Okay, thank you. We do have one more item of business before us, and that is a committee bill draft request introduction. As this is our first one of the session, let me just go over that process very quickly. There are certain bill draft requests that have to be introduced through the Assembly Judiciary Committee. So what we will be voting on today is to introduce that bill, and that means it will go to the floor, get an actual bill number, and then it will come back to the committee for potential action, whether it mean a hearing or not a hearing, before it moves on through the process. So again, an affirmative vote today just allows the measure to be drafted. It doesn't indicate that you're going to support the measure if and when we actually hear it. So what I have in front of me is BDR 16-511 makes various changes relating to offenders. So at this time, I'd be looking for a motion to introduce BDR 16-511.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
I think I have a motion from Assemblyman Wheeler. We have a second from Vice Chair Wynn. Any discussion on the motion before we take a vote? Okay, I don't see any discussion on the motion. Madam Secretary, could we please do a roll call vote? And members, if you are in favor, please say yes. If you are opposed, please say no.
Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod?
Yes.
Assemblywoman Cohen?
Yes.
Assemblywoman Gonzalez?
Yes.
Assemblywoman Hanson?
Yes.
Assemblywoman Hardy?
Yes.
Assemblywoman Kasama? Assemblywoman Krasner?
Yes.
Assemblywoman Marzola?
Yes.
Assemblyman Miller?
Yes.
Assemblywoman Wynn?
Yes.
Assemblyman O'Neill?
Yes.
Assemblyman Orentlicker?
Yes.
Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong? Assemblyman Wheeler?
Yes.
Chairman Yeager?
Yes, and Assemblyman Summers Armstrong, were you a yes or a no on that vote?
Yes, I was just challenged with the draw on the mouse there. Apologies, Chair.
It's perfectly fine. I understand. The motion does carry. All those present voted in favor, and committee members will report that BDR down to the floor. So hopefully that'll get introduced today and you'll have a chance to look at that. It looks like it relates to the State Board of Parole Commissioners and some of their duties. So Hopefully we'll have a chance to look at that soon. Thank you for doing that, committee. We'll have probably several more of those next week to introduce in the committee. With that that matter of business behind us, anything else from committee members this morning before we talk about next week? Okay, I don't see anything. Obviously, committee, it's been a really, really long week in Assembly Judiciary, and just want to express how much I appreciate all of you helping us through this week and your thoughtful questions and preparation. In terms of next week, we have a meeting on Monday, but we will not meet until 10 a.m. So that is the good news. We have one bill that we'll be hearing on Monday. And then we don't have agendas out yet for the rest of the week, but I do anticipate we're going to have committee every day next week. I just don't know what time we're going to meet and how many bills we're going to do. So we'll continue to work that out based on bills that are introduced on the floor today. So with all of that, thank you, committee. I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend. And before I adjourn, I did want to say happy birthday to former Assembly Judiciary Chair and current Speaker Frierson. He's not with us in the building today, but it is his birthday. So if you are watching, we hope you have a great birthday. And I hope you all have a great weekend. I'll see you back here in this committee at 10 a.m. on Monday morning. This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, Chair.